Sydney and Justin, and a grandfather to baby Blaine, who I just met, and is tolerating all of this with earphones. I'm sure many want to put those on today. Throughout his career, Mr. Blanche has held significant roles in both public service and private practice, and it showcased his ability to uphold the rule of law from working on both sides of the courtroom, navigating complex and difficult litigation. His character that values public service and his work ethic were evidenced by his service as a paralegal for the U.S. Attorney's Office in the Southern District of New York, while also putting himself through law school at night at Brooklyn Law School. I dare say many of us couldn't have done that. For my colleagues, who I'm sure we will hear many questions regarding his independence, it is important to remember Mr. Blanche has had an extremely successful career as a highly respected federal prosecutor, serving during the tenures of both President George W. Bush and President Barack Obama. He also served as a law clerk to judges appointed by Republican and Democratic presidents. From prosecuting violent gang members and drug traffickers to handling bank and wire fraud, public corruption, and racketeering cases, Mr. Blanche gained extensive firsthand experience in complex federal prosecutions, experience that will undoubtedly prepare him to tackle some of the most serious challenges we face as a nation. As a private attorney, he defended numerous high-profile clients, including some other lawyers refused to defend. In our conversations leading up to today, I was impressed and indeed inspired by his passion for the assurance our justice system is respected, that it remains a place of those with controversy or accused, know that it is a place of fair resolutions based on law, nothing more. Like me, he understands that a commitment to that is fundamental and is essential to ensure that this great experiment of the United States, of free people governing ourselves, can succeed. Mr. Blanche believes every individual deserves competent representation when the full weight of the government is levied against them, and that it doesn't just take resources, it takes individuals who will step up, like John Adams once did. And it was during his defense work over his career, he saw the danger of prosecutorial excess. As a former federal prosecutor myself, as the wife of a law enforcement officer who once had a long career in federal service, as a judge for over a decade, we discussed, and I know he felt every time the credibility of one of our institutions that should have been respected and revered was attacked, it felt like a gut punch. And as I'm sure you had a client that was attacked, it was also the credibility of our system as a whole that affected you, not just as a lawyer, but as a person with the convictions that knows what it takes for a free, democratic society to survive. When most people would have turned away in the face of overwhelming adversity and personal risk, Mr. Blanche stood up for what he knew was right. And regardless of the pressure he faced inside his own firm or the criticisms he received in the media, Mr. Blanche had the integrity to fulfill his duty not only to President Trump as his attorney, but to fulfill what he believed was the promise of our nation. And as everyone witnessed, his counsel was indeed robust and showcased his talent as an attorney and his convictions as a person. What began as defending President Trump in a single case turned into an impressive effort defending against the flurry and eventual surge of lawfare. With extraordinary legal maneuvering and advocacy, Mr. Blanche served his client, and I also believe he served our nation. On November 14th in 2024, President-elect Trump announced his intention to nominate Mr. Blanche for the position of Deputy Attorney General, a decision built upon the trust and confidence Mr. Trump has in Mr. Blanche's legal acumen and personal experience within the justice system. And at a time when Americans face danger from organized crime, drug traffickers, and foreign terrorists, and when Americans' trust in the judicial system is at an all-time low, I believe Mr. Blanche has the strength and integrity to steer the Department of Justice in the right direction in the perceived weaponization of our government and refocus federal law enforcement on its intended mission, and that is protecting Americans and their rights and restoring faith in our justice system. And I don't want you to just take my word for it. That wouldn't be enough. There's no one better that we can listen to or take the word for than those he worked with throughout his career. He was even at times from a different party, and he served under different presidents. and I think we should listen to them. Over 100 Southern District of New York alumni who worked alongside Mr. Blanche wrote to the committee to convey strong support for his nominations. They wrote that they covered the gamut of intellectual, political, and legal ideologies, but they were united in their support for his nomination to be the next Deputy Attorney General of the United States. They said from the earliest stages of his professional life, he demonstrated love of and dedication to the Department of Justice and its mission to do justice, do the right thing, and to do them the right way. We were fortunate to work with Todd and saw how he puts the core values of the DOJ, independence, impartiality, honesty, integrity, respect, excellence, and a fierce dedication to fairness under law into practice. He is both deeply intelligent and has excellent judgment. Most importantly, he is a fundamentally good and decent man. Time and time again, we saw him strive to do the right thing as a person and a prosecutor. And one of his greatest strengths as a manager over his supervisees was well-earned trust and confidence that he would help them make the right decisions. The motto of the United States Department of Justice is in Latin, but it says, "For who Lady Justice prosecutes," and I assure you that is Todd Blanche. His allegiance will lie with Lady Justice and no one else. It is his belief in this country and the principles it was founded on that guides him in everything he does, every decision he has made over the entire course of his career. It will take, indeed, a strong person of conviction to guide the day-to-day activities of the Department of Justice. It may just take an Iron Man, and I believe we have that man sitting with us today. I commend President Trump for nominating him. Chairman Grassley, Ranking Member Durbin, and colleagues, I am honored to advise the committee that I believe he should receive a speedy consent to become the next Deputy Attorney General of the United States.
Thank you, Senator Moody. For the benefit of people on my side of the aisle, I want to announce that at 11, there's 2 votes. I'm going to go vote at the beginning of the first vote and vote at the end of the second vote. So whoever's here when I'm not here in seniority basis, it's your responsibility to take over. Now I call to the table our 2 nominees, and don't sit down yet, because I would like to give an oath. Would you please raise your right hand? Do you swear that the testimony you're about to give before this committee will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? So help you God. Please be seated. Now I'll start with Mr. Blanche and then Ms. Slater. Before you give your statement, if you want to introduce family and friends, that's the tradition in this committee.
Thank you very much, and good morning. Good morning to everybody. Good morning, Chairman Grassley, Ranking Member Durbin, and thank you, Senator Moody, for your kind introduction. Thank you all for welcoming me here today. This nomination is my American dream. I am humbled by President Trump's trust in me to execute the duties of the Deputy Attorney General in our nation's top law enforcement office. I have worked and will continue to work every single day to maintain the trust of those I represent. As a prosecutor, I upheld the trust of the citizens of the United States. In private practice, I earn the trust of my clients, and if I'm lucky enough to be confirmed, I will work every day to earn, protect, and honor the trust of our shared constituency, the American people. The United States Department of Justice must protect this nation. It must protect its people. It must keep our communities safe and secure. We must secure our borders, and it must protect all of our rights and freedoms. I would, Chairman Grassley, like to introduce some folks that are here with me today. I'm joined by my wife, Christine, my daughter, Sydney, my granddaughter, Blaine, my son, Justin, and his girlfriend, Alexis, my parents, Pam and Richard. I should say that the second Ironman that I completed, my father did it with me at the age of 71 years old. my mother-in-law, Regina, and I have many friends and family with me as well. And I really thank all of them for coming here today and for their support, not only today, but over the past several years. I also know that my older sister, Lori, and my father-in-law, Tom, are watching out for me from above, and I'm sure they have big smiles on their faces today. I also, it's been mentioned a couple times, but I do want to recognize the two judges that I was lucky enough to clerk for after graduating from law school, Judge Denny Chin and Judge Joseph F. Bianco. They're both now on the Second Circuit Court of Appeals. They're both very close friends of mine, and I thank them for their mentorship and for teaching me the foundational principles of how to be a good lawyer and person. I am definitely not a Washington insider. My limited experience in this town is from when I attended American University, waited tables, and worked as an intern at the Department of Justice, and then later as a paralegal in the criminal division. This was back in the late 90s. Soon after that, as it's been mentioned a few times already, I moved to New York with my wife and my two small children to attend law school at night while supporting them. I worked during the day as a paralegal at the Southern District of New York, and I remember the first time I saw a federal prosecutor give an opening statement back in May of 1999. I knew I wanted to be an assistant United States attorney. And to make that dream a reality, I had to, of course, work very hard and give it everything I had. I was a young father. I had two babies at home. I was reading law school textbooks on the train during my 3-hour commute every day. And I know this isn't the typical path to becoming an SDNY AUSA, but that's the beauty of that office and this country. With hard work and focus, anybody from any background has the opportunity to succeed. During my time as an AUSA in the Southern District, I prosecuted all types of federal crime, but my primary focus was prosecuting violent gang members. This work gave me unique insight into the scourge of violent crime and violent gangs. They obliterate neighborhoods, they instill fear in entire communities, and they destroy lives. This is especially true of transnational gangs that have exploited open border policies to expand their dangerous, murderous operations in communities all across this country. These criminals operate with impunity to traffic women and children, kill innocent bystanders, flood our streets with illicit, deadly drugs, and erode the fabric of law and order. President Trump has repeatedly pledged to crush these gangs, and we will. Indeed, I have watched with optimism and approval how the Department of Justice has shifted its priorities to focus on violence, transnational gangs, drugs that are fueling an epidemic of overdoses, and the open borders that allow criminals to infiltrate our country. If confirmed, I intend to continue the mission that was started on January 20th with a clear goal. Gangs, terrorists, and those who aid and harbor them will be found and prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. It is important to remember, though, that while the Department of Justice can save lives, it can also ruin lives. I will always keep this fact in mind, and politics should never play a role in the Department of Justice. But recently, in too many circumstances, it has. Prosecutors in this country have predicated entire campaigns on targeting rivals. We saw cases like the one brought in Manhattan against Paul Manafort in 2019, a blatantly illegal indictment filed by an elected local prosecutor, which was thankfully swiftly thrown out. And then more recently, I have stood next to and defended President Trump as partisan prosecutors and politicians abused our legal system in completely unprecedented ways to fulfill a political agenda, which was prosecuting and attacking President Trump. But my faith in this country returned in full force on November 5th, when the American people rejected this gross abuse of our justice system. Partisan lawfare in our justice system wastes taxpayer money, makes communities less safe and ruins lives. This should never happen in America. America deserves better, and it will stop now. We will work to restore the American people's faith in our justice system, focusing the Department of Justice on the criminals who undermine our safety and destroy our lives, on protecting citizens' rights, and on ensuring that our government can do the job that the voters chose for it to do, rather than on scoring political points or pursuing political enemies, will allow the Justice Department lawyers and our law enforcement partners to go back to simply doing the right thing. The Justice Department includes some of the very best of the very best. People who wake up every day with the singular goal of keeping our streets and borders safe and protecting our liberties. I'm excited for the opportunity to lead them along with Attorney General Bondi. I love this country deeply, and I love the Department of Justice. Thank you for the opportunity to be considered today for the position of Deputy Attorney General, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Chairman Grassley, Ranking Member Durbin, and members of the Senate Judiciary Committee. It is truly an honor to be here today, and I look forward to working with you and with your staff should I be confirmed. I'd like to pay special tribute to Chairman Grassley for belonging to Iowa, which is a state well known for never letting snow get in the way of the people's business. I'd first like to acknowledge my family, my husband, Lindsay Slater, my sons, Liam and Connor, and my mother, Audrey. Without them, none of this happens. My father, Oliver, and my siblings are tuned in, as is my husband's family. My husband grew up on a ranch in Wallowa County, Oregon, and his parents, Lou and Dale, are watching from their ranch house. My family has lived on Capitol Hill for 20 years this year, and our Hill community is well represented by my friends and former colleagues. I cherish them all, and I thank them for being here, despite the snow. Finally, I want to acknowledge and thank President Trump for having confidence in me to lead the DOJ Antitrust Division. This is my second tour working for the President, and I look forward to playing a part in fulfilling his historic mandate from the American people. Senators, I'm a proud and grateful new American, and as such, I have lived the American experiment. If I have learned one thing, it's that Americans cherish liberty in a truly profound way. In our constitutional republic, American citizens can speak their minds, earn a living, and invent new technologies free from unwarranted interference. These freedoms are not guaranteed in so many countries around the world. Quite the opposite, really, and so they must be cherished and defended by us all. For centuries, Americans have stood for freedom from government interference, both at home and abroad. Online, the kids call government interference tyranny.gov. However, Americans increasingly find themselves concerned by the rise of private incursions on their liberty, something even the President and his family have experienced firsthand. As some have humorously pointed out, while nobody wants tyranny.gov, tyranny.com isn't much better. We have grown to appreciate that personal liberty and economic liberty are closely connected, and that in many ways they are two sides of the same coin. And Americans have come to see that economic liberty often hinges on competitive markets. Fortunately, Congress has faced this issue before, and we already have a solution to hand. As long ago as 1890, both Republican and Democrat lawmakers understood this fundamental truth about the meaning of American liberty when they passed the Sherman Act. As Republican Senator Sherman said at the time, monopolies are inconsistent with our form of government. If we will not endure a king as a political power, we should not endure a king over the production, transportation, and sale of the necessaries of life. These Gilded Age lawmakers understood that free markets are not truly free without an effective backstop. And for them, that backstop was robust antitrust enforcement. I should also note that the Senate passed the Sherman Act by a vote of 51-1. In meetings before this hearing, a number of you flagged your antitrust priorities with me, and you also asked me about my antitrust enforcement experience and philosophy should I be confirmed. As to my experience, I'm fortunate to have a career that spans several decades, and I'm eager to bring this to the DOJ. I spent the first 15 years of my career practicing antitrust law, both in private practice and at the Federal Trade Commission. For the past 10 years, I've worked mostly in the private sector with 2 tours in government, first working at the National Economic Council at the White House, and more recently for Vice President Vance in the Senate. The common thread in my private sector work was technology, and I will bring a deep understanding of technology markets to the DOJ. But of course, the DOJ Antitrust Division does not just focus its resources on technology markets. Rather, the work includes investigating and, when appropriate, challenging both civil and criminal conduct across the US economy. My work at the Federal Trade Commission spanned many industries, including pharmaceuticals, retail, and several sectors in between. At the White House, I worked to support the wireless industry's efforts to deploy 5G networks and to strengthen wireless supply chains from foreign adversaries. There I saw firsthand the important role the private sector plays in creating jobs, economic growth, and national security for all Americans. As for my enforcement philosophy, I would turn to President Trump's Truth Social post nominating me last December. According to the President, the goal of the DOJ Antitrust Division will be to ensure that the law is enforced both vigorously and fairly with clear rules. If we follow the President's formula, we will have played a role in preserving the kind of economic liberty Congress stood for when it passed the nation's antitrust laws. In sum, we will have progressed towards the President's goal to make America competitive again. Finally, I would also like to highlight the role played by each of your states in antitrust enforcement. As AG Bondi emphasized at her recent confirmation hearing, she will make it a priority to work with state law enforcers across all DOJ components. And I want to underscore this commitment from AG Bondi as it relates to the Antitrust Division. This is an important point because the division has before it several cases to which both Republican and Democrat state AGs, including most of your states, are parties. I'm excited to work with these state enforcers, as well as the hardworking men and women of the Antitrust Division, to deliver results for American consumers from California to Florida. And I thank you for your attention and look forward to answering your questions.
Thanks to both of you. Now we have 7-minute rounds. FBI emails and other records to the public regarding Arctic Frost, the FBI's case against Trump. Those records show that antitrust Trump FBI agent Thibault drafted, opened, and advanced the information that became the basis of Jack Smith's electoral case. The records further show that the work was done in violation of FBI rules. The government is supposed to produce impeachment evidence to the defense counsels. So, did the government produce emails and records between Thibault and his team of agents to defense counsel, including the ones that I recently made public?
No, Senator.
Okay. You represented President Trump against both Jack Smith's lawfare cases. During the course of those cases, defense counsel raised issues involving DOJ and prosecutorial misconduct. Beyond that, which is public already, are you able to share with this committee additional examples of alleged Justice Department misconduct?
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, yes, for sure. Two things come to mind. The first, and a lot of this actually is public. If you look very long and hard, it just never reported. The first is when President Trump was indicted in Florida first, the prosecutors in that case initially asked the court to not allow President Trump, the defendant in that case, to see the documents that he was charged with, okay, to see the evidence against him. The initial submission said they didn't think that the former president of the United States had a right to see the evidence against him. That's something that even terrorists who are charged often get to see, at least to some extent. Secondly, 3 months later, when President Trump was indicted in D.C., the prosecutors in that case asked the judge to start a trial December 11th of the same year, notwithstanding the fact that Jack Smith knew that he was producing over 11 terabytes of discovery to President Trump and the defendants. He also knew that President Trump was going to be on a trial in New York, a civil trial brought by the AG in New York for much of the fall, and that he already had a trial scheduled in Manhattan to start in the early spring. He also knew that Judge Cannon had already scheduled an evidentiary hearing the same day in Florida that they wanted the trial to start in D.C. Notwithstanding all that, that was their position. And Chairman, the frustration, and if I'm frustrated, I continue to be frustrated, is that the Department of Justice knew that that was happening. Nobody stopped it. Nobody stepped in and said, hey, that's not the way we do things at the Department of Justice. They just let Jack Smith do it. There are other examples. When the Supreme Court decided the immunity decision on July 1st, Jack Smith went right back to the grand jury, removed almost nothing from the indictment, and filed another charge. Department of Justice stood by and let that happen. That I think was a gross miscarriage of justice, Chairman. Later on in September, once again, they filed a brief that has never been filed in any case in United States criminal Department of Justice history. They just filed something. There was no motion pending. They knew it was a month and a half before the election, and so they filed a 170-something page brief that had no basis in the federal rules of criminal procedure. Apparently, they got permission or clearance from the Department of Justice to do that. So those are the two examples that always come to mind when asked about what happened, and to this day, I think that was a travesty of justice.
Ms. Slater, so I can get to a couple questions to you, answer this first one fairly short, although it's important for another longer answer. If confirmed, what will be your top priority in the antitrust division?
Thank you, Senator. As the President said, the task is to apply the antitrust laws vigorously and fairly with clear rules of the road for all.
I'm very concerned about the rising costs of prescription drugs. I believe consolidation in the healthcare industry and anti-competitive practices by both brand and generic drug companies, as well as by pharmacy benefit managers, contribute to these high costs. I hope I can count on you to address the anti-competitive practices of these industries. The three biggest companies have 85%, and most of them are owned by insurance companies. So it seems to me there's something very anti-competitive there. I'm not going to ask you for a commitment, but I'm going to ask you to look at that, and that you'll take companies to take steps to make sure that those rules are abided, the antitrust rules are abided by. I'd like to get back to Mr. Blanche. The New York Times said many people in the legal community ask, quote, why would he ever take that case, meaning the Trump case, end of quote. So And we know that you suffered, you got kicked out of your law firm, that's what I understand. What did you learn from your representation of President Trump?
Well, Chairman, representing President Trump was the greatest job I've ever had. I think if I'm confirmed, my new job will surpass it, but it was the greatest job I ever had. It was an honor, and I learned a ton. It opened my eyes for sure to what happens when politics takes the place of justice. And both you and the ranking member talked about this, and I couldn't agree more that politics should never play a part in the Department of Justice. And I saw with my own eyes in Manhattan, with the Manhattan case, I saw it in the Georgia case, I saw it in both Jack Smith's prosecutions, I saw it in elected officials trying to keep President Trump off the ballot. It opened my eyes to something that I hadn't seen when I was just a prosecutor in New York trying to put gang members in jail.
Thank you both.
Thanks, Senator Grassley. Mr. Blanche, have you seen any videos of the January 6, 2021 assault on the United States Capitol building?
I've seen some videos, yes.
Have you seen any instances where the crowd that was trying to break its way into the Capitol assaulted our police officers?
Yes, I have seen some of those videos.
And have you seen indications of that one police officer they were trying to crush in that doorway? It was shown over and over again. Have you seen that?
I'm sure I have. It doesn't come to mind, but I'm sure it has. Yes.
And you saw perhaps the demonstrators crash through the window with some sort of a shield to gain entry into the U.S. Capitol?
Yes, I believe I've seen that, Senator, yes.
So as a former prosecutor, when you saw those scenes, did it cross your mind that they should be investigated?
Absolutely. Assault of law enforcement, any sort of assault by anybody of law enforcement should never be tolerated and should be investigated.
What is your opinion of the Federal Bureau of Investigation?
Excuse me, Senator?
What is your opinion of the Federal Bureau of Investigation?
What is my opinion?
Yes.
I think the Federal Bureau of Investigation, like you said, is one of the greatest law enforcement offices in the world.
And if you're going to have a federal prosecution of the people who assaulted the Capitol, it would be understandable that you would turn to FBI agents to conduct the investigation. True?
Well, yes.
And of course, during the course of conducting the largest criminal investigation in the history of the Department of Justice, it's no surprise that some 5,000 FBI agents were called on and assigned duties to investigate those crimes.
A lot of FBI agents, is my understanding, were part of that investigation, yes.
Do you understand what's going on now? They're asking the names of all the FBI agents who were engaged in that investigation be disclosed. Are you aware of that?
I am not aware of that, no.
Well, that's a fact. And the defendants in this situation, the FBI agents, attorneys, have asked them to suppress the disclosure of that information publicly.
I've read, I suppose, the same articles and memos that you're speaking of. I don't believe that the disclosure is on the table. I believe providing the names was requested by the United States Department of Justice, which the FBI is a component agency of, yes.
Why?
Well, I'm not there, Senator, but according to the memos that I've read that have now become public, it's to better understand what went wrong. Because in President Trump's view, something went wrong in that investigation.
Something went wrong in the Capitol, too, as we had to vacate the Senate chamber, as the Secret Service pulled the vice president out of his chair in front of all of us, as we were executing our constitutional responsibility to count electoral votes. The president is certainly focused on the investigation, but what about the insurrectionist mob that stormed this Capitol? I'm just wondering, in this situation, how you can justify disclosing the identities of these individuals, many of whom were given an assignment. Didn't you tell me that when you were a U.S. attorney, you didn't have the luxury of picking the cases you worked on? You were told, at least at the beginning, this is what you'll do?
That is true.
And do you believe it was any different for the FBI agents who were investigating January 6th?
Senator, the only thing I'm questioning is the word disclosure. I am not aware of an effort by the Department of Justice or anybody to disclose those names to the public. I'm not there, but from what I've read, the requirement or the ask was to provide information to the Department of Justice.
Are you familiar with the president's decision for a blanket pardon for those who were convicted of crimes on January 6th at the U.S. Capitol?
I am aware that President Trump pardoned everybody, yes, or commuted some sentences, yes.
Commuted all of them. Guy Reffitt, the first defendant to stand trial on charges related to January 6th Capitol insurrection, sentenced to 87 months in prison for bringing a firearm into the Capitol that day. Reffin's 19-year-old son, Jackson, turned him into law enforcement after the attack. Jackson also indicated that Reffitt had threatened to shoot him and his sister, Peyton, if they reported him to authorities. After receiving the blanket pardon from President Trump, Reffitt attended Kash Patel's Senate Judiciary Committee nomination hearing. Here's what he posted on his social media afterwards, quote, "Present and in support of Kash Patel as the leftist commies continue to spew their lies, misinformation, and disinformation. My man, clean house Kash," end of quote. Can you understand why the FBI agents would be reluctant to disclose not only their names, but perhaps the locations of their families in an effort to justify keeping their jobs if this kind of person is on the loose?
I'm not aware of that being asked of any FBI agent or their families, Senator.
So let me just lay it on the table. Are you prepared to say that if your nomination is approved by the United States Senate, you would stop any effort to disclose this information that might jeopardize the safety of FBI agents?
The safety of FBI agents is, of course, extraordinarily important. I cannot sit here today and commit to anything around beyond that statement, that we will never do anything to put the lives of the family or the agents of the Federal Bureau of Investigation in danger.
Well, meeting with the agents' representatives yesterday, I can tell you it's a very real fear on their part that this kind of political system that's being used to purify the ranks of the FBI before the new president gets into office is wrong.
I'm not there, Senator, but that is not my reading of what's happening at all. So again, I wasn't part of the memo drafting or the discussions as to why it was sent, but from what I've read about it, it's not a purge, it's not firing agents, it's collecting information so that what happened doesn't happen again.
And it's never happened before. And these agents who've given their lives to that agency, they ask the basic question, what if the next president is elected and disagrees with President Trump's immigration policy? Are we going to be held responsible again, disclose our names if we got involved in the immigration cases of President Trump?
Senator, I think it has happened before. I mean, the FBI is a component agency of the Department of Justice, and so to the extent that the Department of Justice is seeking information about an investigation, I agree with you, not to this extent, because there's never been an investigation as large as the one that the Department of Justice conducted about January 6th. But the idea that the Department of Justice doesn't have oversight responsibility of the FBI, and that includes agent names at times. I can't believe that in the history of the FBI, this is the first time the Department of Justice has asked for names. I can't believe that that's true.
Well, there were 5,000 agents involved in this investigation that they're now being asked to disclose if they were involved in it. I don't think there's any precedent at the FBI of that kind of effort, and the impact it's going to have on morale and the operation of that agency will not inure to the benefit of the safety of Americans.
On behalf of the chair, Senator Lee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thanks to both of you for your willingness to serve and for being here today. Mr. Blanche, I'd like to start with you. You had a long and distinguished career as a federal prosecutor. While you were at the Department of Justice, you received a Department of Justice Award for Superior Performance as an AUSA for your work in a case called United States versus Lee. That case, as I understand it, involved prosecuting a gang for narcotics trafficking, armed robberies, and even murders. Over the last 4 years, we've seen a crime wave sweeping across the country, including a violent crime wave. How, if you're confirmed as Deputy Attorney General, will you address some of these issues?
Thank you, Senator. I mean, quite simply, to empower United States attorneys around this country to work with not only the federal agencies like the FBI, DEA, ATF, but also with our state and local partners to get into the inner cities, but also into our rural communities and combat violent crime. It can work. We have a lot of money. We have a lot of really great agents and great prosecutors who want to do this work. And so going into a city and cleaning it up, and some of those cases will go to the state. Some of the cases should go federal, but working with our state and local partners and empowering, if confirmed, empowering U.S. attorneys to do their job, I think is the shortest and easiest way to make that happen.
You spent much of your career doing precisely that from a different level, different position, but in that respect, this could feel like stepping into a comfortable set of shoes. Ms. Slater, let's talk about antitrust enforcement for a minute. There is often kind of a comparison in which people will tend to view antitrust law through the lens of either regulation or enforcement. Now, strong enforcement of antitrust laws can often obviate the need for ex post regulation by proactively preventing, discouraging, deterring companies from taking actions that would otherwise run them afoul of the law. Can you just explain your perspective on that distinction between enforcement and regulation as it relates to U.S. antitrust law?
Thank you so much, Senator. This is a really important point. So to summarize from my standpoint, regulation is often necessitated by a high concentration in certain markets. That's when regulators step in. Antitrust enforcement, it's the tool that we use to stop those markets from tipping into the need for regulation. And if I could compare them to tools, I might say antitrust enforcement is a scalpel and regulation is often a sledgehammer. It applies to entire industries all at once, regardless of a specific company's conduct, whereas antitrust is a scalpel, it's targeted enforcement, and it requires evidence of anti-competitive conduct and harm to consumers.
And so by embracing the enforcement angle, we can achieve better outcomes that way, better compliance, and overall end up with lower enforcement costs by the government when we pursue that angle. Is that right?
100%, Senator.
Thank you. Mr. Blanche, your experience in private practice, representing a variety of clients across fields, individuals, business entities, and other types of entities. You've had the experience over and over again of having a client. Even while representing the U.S. government, you've interacted with somebody who serves for your purposes as the mouthpiece of the government, and therefore the mouthpiece of the client. As a lawyer, you're always acting as a client. One of the important features there involves learning how to tell the client no when the answer isn't there, and where the answer is no, helping to guide the client to the best resource, the best approach under the law, consistent with principles of the sound practice of law. Tell us how this will guide and inform your work if confirmed as Deputy Attorney General.
I agree with everything you said. I mean, I think that if you're in a room with whether it's a client or another lawyer, and you just always agree or yes that person, you're not doing your job. And I think that in private practice, that's the same is true of a client. You're not going to agree with your client on anything, on everything, and they're not going to agree with you on everything. And the goal is to counsel them to achieve the best results. And that's what I've learned. Certainly that includes being a prosecutor as well, but that's what I've learned over the past 10 years as a defense attorney. And certainly that will help me if I'm confirmed as Deputy Attorney General.
Now, that makes sense. Those same principles do apply in very meaningful ways. Mrs. Slater, during President Trump's first term in office, the Department of Justice and the Federal Trade Commission launched investigations into a number of big tech companies, including Google, Apple, Meta, and Amazon, for anti-competitive conduct. The Biden administration continued those cases which had bipartisan support for them, certainly within the Senate and within the House. And those cases are still ongoing today. How will you continue to hold big tech accountable when it comes to antitrust law?
Thanks for the question, Senator. You're correct. There is a through line on many big tech cases between the first Trump term and today. And so being handed over to me at the Department of Justice specifically are two cases involving one of the big tech platforms, Google. I don't have the file in front of me, and it is pending litigation. However, the intention is to, in good faith, go and visit with the staff, get up to speed on the file, and take it from there. Resources are, of course, very important consideration in antitrust litigation. In taking cases further, it's very complex civil litigation, as you know, and costly. So that will be a consideration, but absolute intention is to, once I get there, read into all of the open litigations that are in the docket.
Thank you. And then finally, Mr. Blanche, you've borne testimony today based on some of your own personal experiences and others that you've observed from afar. What has happened with the politicization within the Department of Justice, the deployment of lawfare to go after, to try to imprison the then incumbent president's last standing political challenger, his only obstacle to another 4 years in the White House. What will you do if confirmed as Deputy Attorney General to end that dangerous and unprecedented trend?
It's simple. Politics will play no role, full stop, period. Outside influence in the Department of Justice cannot happen. And I think what we saw over the past several years was something completely inconsistent with that concept and that idea. And the whole country saw it, but I saw it firsthand. And the damage that it did, and I think that it continues to do right up until November 5th, was hard. And it's going to take a long time to grab that credibility back. But the way to grab it back is to just have politics play no role in it, period.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Lee. Senator Whitehouse.
Thanks very much. Ms. Slater, you can relax. My questions are for Mr. Blanche. Mr. Blanche, we have seen at DOJ secret OLC opinions so shoddy that when they came to light, they had to be withdrawn by the Department of Justice. As the Deputy Attorney General, will you countenance secret OLC opinions so shoddy that when they come to light, they have to be withdrawn?
I'm aware of I believe what you're speaking about, and OLC is extraordinarily powerful. They have a very important role in our government.
Given that I have short time, I'd appreciate it if you could answer the question as quickly as possible. Will you countenance secret OLC opinions so shoddy that they then have to be withdrawn?
I can't comment on what I will possibly do. I do not think OLC opinions should be shoddy, full stop.
And it's a pretty good sign that they were when the department has to withdraw them as soon as they come to light, right?
I can't speak to
Let me move on. We've also seen at DOJ efforts to fire U.S. attorneys for refusing to do political prosecutions, a scandal that ultimately led to the resignation of Attorney General Gonzalez. Will you countenance efforts to fire or discipline U.S. attorneys for refusing to do political prosecutions?
Political prosecutions should never happen, period.
Period. There is a contacts policy that has existed for decades between the White House and the Department of Justice, limiting who can talk to each other about ongoing cases, limiting it to a very few, very senior officials on both sides. Will you maintain and enforce that policy?
I'm aware of the policy. I have not discussed it with Attorney General Bondi. I'm aware of the reason why that policy exists and the benefits of it, and I will discuss it with General Bondi, and I don't see any reason why it wouldn't continue.
Recently, at the Environment and Natural Resources division, multiple section chiefs were reassigned away from environmental enforcement to sanctuary cities stuff. And evidently, other lawyers in that division have been put on leave without explanation. Now, can you think of a reason why somebody who is expert in environmental law adds value to a sanctuary cities legal effort?
I know nothing about what happened or why it happened, and I'm not going to speculate as to why that happened, if it happened. I just don't know anything about it. So
but in the legal questions running around sanctuary cities and whether the government can commandeer municipal efforts, the federal government can commandeer municipal efforts, does the Clean Air Act, in your view, figure into that in any way? The Clean Water Act, does that figure in any way? Endangered Species Act, does that figure in any way?
I mean, I don't know. I can't answer that question without understanding
it's
what
hard
they're
to
doing.
think of a way. Can we agree on that?
I'm not going to commit or agree on something I literally know nothing about the reasoning behind why it happened.
Here's why I'm asking you. The fossil fuel industry has on record contributed about $100 million to Trump's political campaign in the last election. That's just what we know. The dark money side is nothing but question marks. The number could be 5 times that as far as we know. And because, to me at least, there's no plausible reason for adding environmental law experts to a sanctuary cities workforce, what it really looks like is that what's being done here is that the environmental cops are being cleaned out so that polluters have way more ability to push the Department of Justice and to get away with pollution. I would like to hear from you what you think the role of the Department of Justice is in pursuing environmental crimes, and whether you will see to it that there is a continuing robust effort to do that.
I will commit to following the law to the extent that there's polluters who are violating the law. Of course, they should be investigated.
Well, you know, that's fine in theory, but when the people who know this stuff best, when the division that does this work has effectively been decapitated, and the remaining legal workforce has, to some degree, it's not clear yet because we can't get straight answers, been put on leave, what it looks like is that the doors have been opened at the Department of Justice for big polluters to be able to come through and pollute without consequence, because the cops who stand on that beat have all been moved away. So I would urge you to keep an eye on that. I can promise you that I will be keeping an eye on that. The last thing I have to say, this is, you know, you represented President Trump. You have a lot of obligations to him, a lawyer. You have your experience with that. So I'm not going to ask you to respond to this. You will almost certainly disagree. But the narrative that has developed around here that the reason that President Trump was prosecuted is because of a massive fraud and corruption effort in the FBI and the Department of Justice is not the only, and certainly in my view, not the most plausible explanation. The other possibility why Trump was charged with crimes is because he committed crimes. And in fact, he's been convicted of committing crimes in every case that was allowed to go to judgment, as best I can keep track. So before this narrative of corruption, weaponization gets completely out of control, I do want to just make the point that there is another possible explanation. And the other possible explanation is that the guy committed the crimes.
Well, I do very much disagree with that, Senator.
As I expected you would as his lawyer, and I respect that.
Not just as his lawyer.
My time is up.
Ms. Slater, let me give you a chance to do a little bit of talking. We are living through, it's fair to say, I think, a wave of concentration in industry. From 2005 to 2020, industry concentration increased in the United States by 50%, particularly accelerating post-COVID. Would you agree that from an antitrust perspective, this is something to be concerned about?
Senator, I haven't seen this chart before, but I have no reason to disbelieve its accuracy. And I would agree that that is a troubling number.
We've seen industry concentration in pharma, which Senator Grassley talked about. We've seen it in meat packing, which is particularly important in my state to our agricultural producers, our ranchers and our farmers. We've seen it in other aspects of agriculture. Would you agree that concentration, it doesn't matter which industry it's in, concentration that leads to monopoly power in any industry is a cause for concern when it comes to freely operating markets? Is that fair to say?
Yes, Senator. I refer you back to my opening statement.
Yes, and that would include the tech sector. In fact, just looking at concentration in tech, the standard that the Department of Justice historically uses to measure concentration now has that concentration level as high as it has ever been in the tech sector as of 2023 in the 99th percentile. You spoke eloquently in your opening statement about the dangers to personal liberty that comes from the concentration of economic power. Why would that, is that also true in the tech sector? Is it fair to say that a concentration of power in the tech sector is also a threat to personal liberty as it would be in any other sector? Is that fair to say?
Yes, Senator. I think there are a growing number of conservatives in particular, but also Democrats who see the exercise of private power as connected to the economic power of the companies involved. I think that's a fair statement in general.
And why is it, just if you could, tell us a little bit more about why concentrations, economic concentrations in the hands of private monopolies can be a threat to personal liberties. Why is that something we should be particularly concerned about, maybe especially in this age of tech concentration?
So, as an example, the business of debanking and deplatforming in both the banking sector and the tech sector for that matter, is something that we've seen with increasing frequency in the past 5 years. I could provide some concrete examples, but I know you're aware of them, as is probably everybody in the room. And I think that a lot of people see that kind of deplatforming, that kind of debanking as a function of there being perhaps only two players in a given industry. Much easier to do that when you have a duopoly.
Yeah, in other words, if you have a concentration of market power in one or two or maybe three hands, then the agenda that the monopolist wants to pursue, whether that's an agenda related to price fixing or price gouging, or whether that's an agenda that has more of a political valence. So you were just saying, maybe they'll censor speech. Maybe they'll say, if you have particular ideological commitments, you supported President Trump, you're not welcome to bank with us. That becomes quite acute when you effectively don't have any other choices. Is that fair to say in layman's terms?
Yes, Senator, and you are far beyond the layman in antitrust terms, of course. I mean, another practical application of the kind of conduct we're describing is non-competes. This is just to depoliticize and deconflict the issue. This is a growing practice. It's of concern in many parts of the country. It prevents workers from switching jobs easily. And that's something that I think is also quite prevalent in markets that are highly concentrated.
Is there any reason to think that the concern over the concentration in tech in particular and its threat, its effect on personal liberty would be diminished in any way in the age of AI?
So we're still in the very early stages of AI, as you know. It's a nascent technology, a nascent industry. And so I wouldn't want to make that call just yet, frankly, Senator. But I think there are commentators who do see the emergence of highly concentrated markets in parts of the AI technology stack.
Well, I can tell you, I'm extremely concerned about it. I'm extremely concerned about what the emergence of AI and monopoly power in AI will mean for American consumers. Senator Blumenthal and I worked together the last 2 years on our subcommittee here as part of the Judiciary Committee, hearing from people like Sam Altman. And what we discovered is, in issue after issue, whether it is the ability of parents to protect their children's personal information, virtually impossible in the age of AI when these companies are scooping up every piece of data and there's nothing a parent can do to stop it. Whether it is the creation of deepfake pornography, where people are able to use the technology, go get someone's picture off of the internet, a child's picture from Facebook, and then use it to create pornographic images. Nothing that a parent can do to stop it. Nothing that a victim can do to stop it. Nothing that virtually any of us can do to protect our personal data at all. And where is this power concentrated? It's in the very few hands of the people who control AI. And sometimes we hear stories about how AI is going to redound to the benefit of workers. I hope that's true, but who it's redounding to the benefit of right now, for sure, is the major technology companies, the monopolists, who largely control this sector. So let me just ask you, broadly speaking, what is it that antitrust enforcement can do when it comes to unwinding concentration to protect personal liberty?
Well, as I discussed with Senator Lee, I think one important outcome it can lead to is it can deflect the need for regulation, which, again, I liken this to antitrust as a scalpel. Regulation is a sledgehammer, and I think that often will lead to, well, almost certainly will lead to more competition and freer markets, and that in turn will drive new entry and increased innovation in those markets.
You know, I think you've got this exactly right. I mean, preventing power imbalances where one or two or three monopolists or near monopolists control all of the information, they stifle competition. The real problem with that is, besides the fact it can impose increased costs and harms on consumers, there's a massive power imbalance between these companies and average, normal, working Americans. And to me, I see what you're going to do, which is very important in antitrust. Antitrust enforcement helps unwind those power concentrations and gives more power to individual Americans. And I will just say now, if you'll allow me just a moment to editorialize, you don't have to comment on this, I think it's absolutely vital that this body do everything we can to put more power back into the hands of individual Americans. You talked about how antitrust suits can be a scalpel, enforcement suits can be a scalpel. Why not put that scalpel in the hands of everyday Americans? Why not open the courtroom doors against these technology companies in particular, including these AI companies, to allow normal Americans, everyday Americans, to bring suit against them to defend their own rights in their personal information, in their children's information? That, I think, is such a common sense solution. Do you know, when Sam Altman sat where you're sitting, Ms. Slater, and I asked him about this, he said to me in all seriousness, under oath, he said, wait a minute, are you saying that we can't be sued right now? You're saying that a technology company can't be sued? And I had to walk him through the fact that, in fact, there's a massive liability shield that Congress has given these technology companies, a shield nobody else gets, special privileges nobody else gets. You talk about enshrining a group of robber barons at the expense of the American people. This has got to change. We have got to give power back to individual Americans to protect their rights. And antitrust enforcement by the U.S. government is a critical part of that. So I look forward to your work in this area. And with that, I recognize Senator Klobuchar.
Very good. Thank you, Mr. Hawley. As Mrs. Slater knows, you and I have worked together on a number of these antitrust issues, and I really appreciated your comments, and also your comments earlier this week about following the rule of law, which I hope everyone watching this hearing on C-SPAN will also listen to in terms of following judges' orders. So I will start, before I get to my favorite topic, with you, Mrs. Slater. I'll start with you, Mr. Blanche. I appreciated our meeting and our discussions about line attorneys and how you spoke with admiration for your colleagues at the Southern District, in the Southern District of New York's office, as well as law enforcement. And I just want to start out with something that's been covered in different ways by my colleagues, but you served as the president's personal lawyer, already acknowledged here. The president now has lawyers in the White House counsel's office that represent him there. Is the Deputy Attorney General the president's lawyer?
No.
Okay. And last Wednesday, the Attorney General issued a memo in which he said DOJ lawyers must be zealous advocates for their clients' interests. Quote, this was from the memo, and to do otherwise deprives the president of the benefit of his lawyers. Obviously, that concerned me very much, as it did some of my colleagues, because she referred to the lawyers at the DOJ, which you've acknowledged are not the president's lawyers, as the president's lawyers. you were a prosecutor. Every court appearance you stood up and you said you were there on behalf of the United States. Is that right?
Or the government, yes.
Okay. And when you served in the Southern District of New York during the Bush and Obama administrations, did you see yourself as President Bush or President Obama's lawyers?
I did not.
Okay. And all Justice Department lawyers take an oath to the Constitution. And isn't it true, once again, that their client is the people of the United States and not the president?
That is true.
Okay. So we move on from there because I think that is really going to be a guideline for both of you, if confirmed, that we're going to have to ask yourself time and time again. So you and I talked, Mr. Blanche, about the work of the local U.S. attorneys. I told you about our Minnesota U.S. Attorney's Office that through many presidents has functioned incredibly well, taken on some of the biggest cases in the country, was recently led by Andy Lugar, who recently stepped down, but the office has been instrumental in combating violent crime, some of the major white-collar cases, including at one point the second biggest case next to the Madoff case in the country. Fentanyl off the streets, human trafficking, and there's really been an upsurge in the number of trials they've been taking. He's making sure that each one of them actually goes to court for a trial. Could you talk about how much of a priority it is to make sure that we have good relationships and support line prosecutors and case agents?
Yes, absolutely. I think that the real work that the department does that really helps the American citizens that we work for is done at the U.S. Attorney level, for sure, especially in the area of violent crime. And so, in my mind, empowering U.S. attorneys to work not only with federal agents, like I said earlier, but also with state and local partners to go in and eradicate violent crime. The drug problem, that's not just an inner city problem, it's a problem in rural communities, it's everywhere, should be of the highest priority of the department. It's certainly President Trump's highest priority, and I very much agree with it.
Thank you. Mrs. Slater, as you know, I am happy to geek out on antitrust at any moment, but first question I just wanted to ask you is similar. Do you agree that antitrust enforcement should also be free of political considerations or influence, including from the White House?
Yes, Senator, I'd echo Mr. Blanche's remarks in that regard.
And I know you've made this pledge, but I am not confident that the Trump administration will not attempt to use the antitrust laws, not necessarily, well, you will be the one that will help make this decision, as will Mr. Blanche. And I want to make sure that they're not getting involved, as I believe happened a bit in the last administration when Donald Trump was in charge, to use their position as leverage regarding companies that oppose its agenda. The antitrust division's only aim should be to protect consumers and preserve competitive markets. If you are asked to open an investigation or file a lawsuit for any reason other than legitimate law enforcement purposes, can we count on you to rebuff those requests?
Well, Senator, I think I would disagree with the premise of the question. I don't anticipate
Okay, understand.
a fact pattern
Okay,
like you described.
appreciate that.
I'll follow the context policies that I'm sure will be set in place in due course by senior leadership at DOJ.
Okay, because I just cannot tell you how important that's going to be, because as you can see, there's bipartisan support for the cases that are ongoing, including Google, Live Nation, Ticketmaster, Apple, RealPage. I actually asked Attorney General Bondi to commit to continuing these cases, and she said yes. And will you commit to continue to, without going into the details of them, prosecute the antitrust cases currently moving forward in the antitrust division?
Well, as I've already said, it's subject to confirmation and not being in the building. I mean, my number one priority will be to read into the docket that is somewhat historic in terms of Section 2 cases at the DOJ.
Okay, very good. I work with Senator Grassley to pass a law that updates corporate merger fees for the first time in 20 years. You and I discussed that, also discussed it with Mr. Blanche. Before this law went into effect, there were fewer employees, 350 fewer employees working in antitrust than there were in 1979. I just want to make sure that you will continue to advocate for more resources for the department, for the division.
Yes, Senator, that it will be my job to be the lead advocate for adequate resources for the DOJ Antitrust Division.
Okay. And again, I've heard good things about your work from people on both sides of the aisle, and I really appreciate that. And I think you know that under both the original Trump administration, under Macon Doerheim, and then under Jonathan Cantor, these cases were brought, big, major cases, to get at these monopoly problems in this consolidation that Senator Hawley and I both focused on. And I just want to make sure that you continue to have that commitment to carry through on that. I think we have such an opportunity to finally do something about this if these cases are handled well. Will you carry through on that commitment?
Yes, Senator. As I said, it's subject to confirmation
Yes.
and to having access to the file.
Okay, very good. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. Appreciate you both being willing to go through this today. We look forward to what you are going to bring to the Department of Justice using your extensive careers to benefit the American people and those institutions. I know antitrust sometimes isn't a dinner time conversation, around America, but many people don't realize how that area of law, and certainly that enforcement of law, can affect everyday citizens and certainly their pocketbooks. And you would agree, yes or no, that antitrust law is meant to ensure that we in America have a truly free market and that it is meant to protect consumers.
100%, Senator.
And, each of our states has an antitrust division of our own. So in Florida, we have a pretty extensive antitrust division. We look at proposed mergers just as you would, as it would affect the competitive markets of our states. And like many things that we scratched our head over the last 4 years, some things in the antitrust space caused us some concern, especially after we dedicated so much time and effort to thoroughly reviewing proposed mergers and how it would affect our own market. And I wanted to bring your attention and get your opinion about the JetBlue and Spirit merger. And as you know, after that was announced, our state looked at that, combed through that. We were very concerned about the continuity of one of those entities specifically. We saw the warning signs there. We looked at the data. We worked with them in advance to ensure, using more routes, assurances about number of flights, how that would affect competition, what the interest was to compete with maybe larger airlines. And in all of that, we worked with them to assure that we could provide a true competitive market in Florida. And after that, the federal government decided to object to that merger and take them to court. And not soon thereafter, one of those entities declared bankruptcy. Are you familiar with that?
Yes, Senator.
Just what we feared in Florida would happen. And in that instance, you had, I believe it was the 6th and 7th largest airlines trying to combine to compete with the Big Four. And I may be getting those exact numbers wrong, but that was the aim, to provide more competition to consumers and members of our own states and being able to travel. And as a result of that anticipated ability to move up and compete with the larger airlines may not happen. You would agree?
Yes, Senator.
My question to you is, how do you view the DOJ's working relationship with the antitrust divisions within the states, and how do you believe that we might work together to cooperate and communicate to ensure that something like that doesn't happen again?
Senator, I'd give you a three-word answer: communicate, communicate, communicate. As I referenced in my opening statement, it's my hope and strong belief that antitrust enforcement is best done in partnership with state attorneys general to the extent possible, and in cases where it's relevant, where you have local markets, for example, that are impacted by a merger and so on. And so I think it's very, very important. The state AGs bring to the table a different mindset. They are first responders on the ground often and see anti-competitive conduct in the marketplace long before the feds do here in DC. And so they play a really important role. And you have my commitment that going forward, we will absolutely be communicating hard with state AG partners. And I'm already in touch with some of them.
And I would assume I also have your assurance to examine ways that we could ensure remedies or other alternatives before we charge in and go to court to determine if we can assure competition without blowing up deals that may in fact result in more competition.
Yeah, that's absolutely a fair comment, Senator. Often remedies, if done right, if they're robust, divestitures, for example, can remove any competitive harm from a merger in order to allow it to proceed in a pro-consumer, pro-competitive manner.
Thank you, Ms. Slater. And I'll turn now to some other concerns I think Americans were horrified watching over the last 4 years, as many areas in our nation, cities, certain states, had leadership, whether that be mayoral or county commission or even lead prosecutors. Some would call themselves the top cops, deciding which laws should and should not be enforced, which in many areas led to an explosion of crime when that happened. What is your opinion, Mr. Blanche, on how the federal government should step in, supplement, help the areas where citizens suffer as a result of that agenda-driven leadership? What is your ideas for how DOJ might be able to help the citizens that are really needing some true dedication to the rule of law in those areas?
Senator, thank you for the question. I think that you are 100% right that we have seen, especially in major cities in this country, just a lack of enforcement against violent crime. And that has led to massive problems in the drug space where we have hundreds and hundreds of people dying from overdoses, much less the violent crime that comes with that industry. And the federal government has a lot of power. We have a lot of laws. And with that power comes responsibility, of course, and we have to work with our state and local law enforcement to help them do what they are empowered to do. That doesn't mean every case should go federal. To the contrary, most cases should not. But still, if local law enforcement feels like they have a partner with us, so that when the right case comes around, whether it's a apartment complex or a project that needs federal attention because of a drug problem or violence problems, or whether it's an individual defendant who really needs to be targeted because of the violence he's enacting in the community, that's what we should be doing. And it's not necessarily hard. I think it's empowering U.S. attorneys, like I've said a couple times today, and I believe it, to work with law enforcement and to work with their state and local partners to get it done.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Blanche.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Thank you both for your commitment to public service and for being here today. Mr. Blanche, you and I had an opportunity to talk yesterday, and I'm convinced that you're committed to the impartial and objective enforcement of law and the ethos of the Department of Justice. So I'm going to say you are going to be the one with your finger in the dike, because there will be times, if history is any guide, that the president will ask you to do things that are illegal or immoral. I need to be sure that you're willing to say no to the president of the United States when he does it.
Senator, I respectfully very much reject that premise. I don't think that President Trump is going to ask me to do anything illegal or immoral. And so I don't.
But if he does, you would say no.
I will follow the law, Senator, period. And so to the extent that and by the way, I've spent thousands, certainly hundreds, probably thousands of hours with President Trump over the past couple of years. So I don't just say that flippantly. I say that with experience and firsthand knowledge.
And others have said the same thing and then been confronted by President Trump with requests, orders, demands that they do things that were illegal or immoral. So I welcome your commitment that you're going to follow the law, but the fact is that 4 of the people nominated by President Trump to top roles at the Department of Justice were his personal attorneys, like yourself. Attorney General Bondi served on his legal team during his first impeachment. Your law partner, Emile Beauvais, has been appointed to be your principal deputy at the department if you're confirmed, and John Sawyer, nominated to serve as the Solicitor General, argued President Trump's immunity case in front of the Supreme Court last year. That's why I say you're going to be the linchpin of defending the rule of law. Let me ask you about a decision recently made by Attorney General Bondi. She disbanded the Foreign Influence Task Force at the FBI, which combats efforts by our foreign adversaries to interfere in American democracy. I was deeply disappointed that she made that decision. In fact, it reverses the 2017 decision of the Trump administration to establish that Foreign Influence Task Force at the FBI. And her disbanding it and her announcement also that she is going to scale back efforts under FARA to pursue lobbying efforts in her first day in office, I also found discouraging. Shouldn't we be ramping up our enforcement of FARA and countering foreign influence in this country, which we've seen heighten during the past couple of elections?
So I don't know the reasoning behind Attorney General Bondi's decisions to do what she did on her first day in office. I also don't know what I quibble with ramping up. I mean, I think it depends. I think the Department of Justice has to have priorities.
Intensify, increase, because of the threat of disinformation and misinformation from Iran and Russia and China aimed at dividing our democracy.
I very much agree that those are very important issues that the Department of Justice handles. I'm not prepared to say today that they should be intensified or ramped up or increased. I'm not in a position to say
Let me ask you, because of the announcement yesterday that the federal workforce will be diminished in number, are you prepared to defend the Department of Justice against the executive order, if it's applied to the Department of Justice, that vacancies not be filled and the workforce, attorneys and others be cut by a quarter or more?
I will do everything in my power to make sure that the Department of Justice fulfills its mission. I don't believe that requires defending an executive order issued by the President of the United States.
You don't think that defending the Department of Justice's workforce is necessary if an executive order slashes and trashes the agency that you have served in the past and come to admire and revere?
Senator, the words that you're using, defending and slashing and things like that, I don't agree with that. I don't agree with that. That's what the executive order said, and I don't agree that
Well, let me take the Antitrust Division. Ms. Slater, you need attorneys and economists and staff to pursue antitrust cases, don't you?
Yes, Senator.
And what if the president's executive order means a 1/4 cut in the resources available to your unit? Won't that undermine your enforcement efforts?
Well, Senator, like Mr. Blanche, I'm not in the building, so I'm not fully aware of what's going on
But
inside.
you know from having worked with that division how deeply resources matter. We know, because I've enforced antitrust statutes as Attorney General of the state of Connecticut, that antitrust is one of the resource-intensive prosecutions in the government.
I absolutely agree with that. And if I could, Senator, I think what this discussion's opened up is an opportunity for me to talk about the merger filing fees modernization legislation, which I know many members of this committee
Well, I'm going to
supported on a
interrupt with
bipartisan
apologies
basis.
because
Okay.
my time is very limited,
Okay.
and I'll yield to the chairman if he wants to give me more time. But I want to talk to you about egg prices and about groceries and about the costs of food. We've seen a rampant, rapid increase over the last year, but really over the past years, in the prices of food in the United States, the result of rampant, rapid consolidation in meat, dairy, and yes, eggs. This most recent increase in egg prices is not the first. In fact, it's the culmination of a gradual increase, which in turn has produced rising profits in that industry and other food-related industries, from the processors to the agricultural industry. It has squeezed farmers, processors, and consumers. What will you do about it?
So, Senator, with regard to eggs, I think it is important also to understand and see that we've had a supply-side shock in the form of the avian flu on egg supply. So I think that's an important factor. But broadly,
It's one factor, but not even the most important factor.
So
what are you going to do about the consolidation in the industry?
So what I will say is we have already been tasked by the White House via a presidential memorandum to look closely into ways in which we can work to reduce consumer prices, because it is a very pressing issue. I absolutely agree with you on that. That's an administration-wide presidential memorandum. And to the fullest extent possible, I will absolutely focus on that.
Well, I want to see you focus on the industry, not on the memorandum. I want to see you take a tough, unyielding, aggressive approach to crack down on consolidation and monopoly power and the misuse of that power in the industry, because that's the reason, ultimately, that consumers are frustrated and furious right now. And it's not only consumers, it's farmers and it's small businesses. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Did you want to say something that you didn't get a chance to say?
Well, with your permission, Chairman, I think, Senator Blumenthal, again, you're going to find yourself in an unusual situation because the President agrees with you on all fronts. And so the task to hand for me is to make America competitive again, to vigorously and fairly enforce the antitrust law. So I'm absolutely committed to that.
Senator Tillis, am I right?
Mr. Chair, I'll let Senator Schmidt go.
Senator Schmidt.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Senator Tillis. Ms. Slater, thank you for being here today, and congratulations on your nomination. You're clearly very qualified, and your record demonstrates a real motivation, I think, to take on the tough fights to make sure our markets aren't distorted. And I think there's a phrase that's often used that power corrupts can. I think power reveals. And in concentrations of power, we really see those abuses. And I think we saw that with this unholy alliance between the federal government and some of the biggest companies in the history of the world, big tech, to censor Americans. I saw it firsthand as the Attorney General of Missouri. We brought that lawsuit, Missouri versus Biden, and the discovery was shocking. Regardless of if you've got a red jersey on or a blue jersey on, the idea that high-ranking government officials were deplatforming and silencing Americans because they had a point of view about, let's say, the efficacy of masks or whether the vaccine prevented transmissibility. And in this kind of Orwellian newspeak, shut down millions of voices. I mean, we've never seen anything like this in the history of our country. And I have deep concerns that big tech hasn't gotten the memo yet. There's some signs that maybe they're embracing free speech once again, but the abuses of government, I think, in working with those big tech companies to collude and coerce those companies will go down as some of the worst First Amendment violations in the history of the United States of America. Do I have your commitment to work with me if we see those kinds of abuses again?
Yes, Senator.
Thank you. I want to ask you a little bit, sort of in that vein. that, you know, antitrust law makes it a crime for companies to band together and set rates, a practice known, of course, as price fixing. Would you agree that if, let's say, a group of advertisers colluded in a campaign to fix a price at, say, 0, as in boycott a specific conservative news site, that practice would be illegal under antitrust law?
Well, Senator, same as with everyone else, you're asking me a hypothetical, but if I could ground it in what we've seen in terms of reporting and facts and evidence from the GARM report. So this was a report that came out of the House Judiciary Committee last summer. And so what was evidenced there was a pattern of conduct involving a trade association, which for and on behalf of national brands and international brands selectively stopped advertising dollars or counseled companies not to send advertising dollars to certain companies. And the reason that was important is because the brands involved account for about 90% of ad spend domestically. It's a big number. And I think it's fair to say a certain amount of collusion went on via this trade association. And I think that pattern of conduct is quite troubling, and that's what the House report concluded. So I can share that with you because it's not a hypothetical.
Yeah, sadly, my question actually wasn't a hypothetical, sadly speaking. But thank you for your answer. I do want to visit with you just a little bit, Mr. Blanche. Good to see you again. This isn't the first time we met.
It is not.
We met in a New York courtroom.
We did.
In the spring.
Yes, we did.
And
he wasn't a client.
I was not a client.
Sorry.
I was there to witness a true perversion of our legal system. You know, books I'm sure will be written about this, but the coordinated effort, by the way, between the White House and the Department of Justice and even local prosecutors to jail their chief political opponent is I think will go down as one of the great abuses and a stain on Merrick Garland's record forever and Joe Biden's record forever. Let's have the debate, let's have an election, and I think the American people weighed in their own jury box and delivered their verdict that they didn't want to see us become a banana republic. But you were front and center in all that, and I want to just give you the opportunity, and maybe one more question after that, but an opportunity to, what did you see? I mean, you were in the front row for this. I mean, you're arguing. I saw some of the objections that were being made that were overruled, and it was just a circus. But what did you take from that whole experience? And how can you use that then to make sure this never happens again?
It's a great question, and I think about that question a lot. I think my take from the whole experience is how powerful law enforcement really is at the state and federal level, and how much responsibility we have as prosecutors to make sure that we don't use that power in a way that is really, it's corrupt. It becomes corrupt. I mean, there's examples that I could speak about all day, but when you have, for example, a judge knowing there's another trial scheduled on the same day with the same defendant, refused to even discuss moving that trial date, knowing that the defendant, in this case, President Trump, would have to prepare for 2 separate criminal trials at the same time that he's on trial across the street in a case brought by the Attorney General of New York to try to destroy his business. That's power. And that's power that's corrupted. And so what I take from that is not that we don't have a lot of power, we do. But what I take from that is that we have to do, when we are prosecuting cases, civil or criminal, we have to simply do the right thing. It can't be because of politics. It can't be because you don't like something President Trump said. It can't be because you ran on a campaign that said that I'm going to go after President Trump, that you should elect me because I'm the only one that's successfully gone after him before.
Well, and I agree, as a former prosecutor myself, the restraint that you need to have is really important. And that was completely lost in this. And Jack Smith is perhaps the worst offender, known as overcharging, known as somebody that is a henchman and was picked specifically to go do the bidding here was disgusting. And one of the worst abusers, and he can't be sort of on the Mount Rushmore of the lawfare disaster that we saw, Matthew Colangelo. And I just want you to comment on this, and I'm going to ask you a quick question. He left his position, you're coming in as a number 2, left his position as the number 3 person at DOJ to go where? To go prosecute a state law on a bookkeeping error in New York. Now, why would he do that? Why would he do that? It's clearly a step down from the role that he had at the Department of Justice. I mean, I think, again, it's all part of this coordinated effort from lawfare. He was number 3 at DOJ, goes to New York to help prosecute this ridiculous case. And I know I'm out of time, so I'm just going to ask you, will you commit to not leave your post to take a low-level prosecutor position that would allow you to prosecute a political opponent?
I so commit.
All right, thank you very much.
Thank you, Senator.
With that, on behalf of the chair, Senator Hirono.
Thank you. I asked the following 2 initial questions of all nominees who come before any of my committees. So I'll start with you and then go to Ms. Slater. Since you became a legal adult, have you ever made unwanted requests for sexual favors or committed any verbal or physical harassment or assault of a sexual nature?
No, Senator.
Slater?
No, Senator.
Have you ever faced discipline or entered into a settlement relating to this kind of conduct?
No, Senator.
Mr. Blanche, the Deputy Attorney General oversees the FBI, the Criminal Division, the National Security Division, and the management of the department. Generally, that's a lot. And there's been enormous upheaval, I hope you recognize that, at the department and FBI in recent weeks. Last week, at DOJ's request, the FBI provided the DOJ a list of over 5,000 names of those who worked on January 6 matters. Why do you think the DOJ asked for this information?
Well, Senator, I wasn't part of the decision that was made to ask for the information, but I've read about it like you have.
You think that it should be a routine kind of thing to ask this kind of information under your watch? Would this kind of thing keep happening?
It depends on why the information was requested.
Yeah, that's why I'm asking you. Why do you think? It had a chilling effect, don't you think? It led to a lot of uncertainty and people being very concerned about their names being released. So you were asked some questions along those lines. You don't know. But once you do get confirmed, you're going to end up with all these names, not just the FBI, but you're going to have DOJ people whose names you will have. What do you intend to do with all of that?
I believe that President Trump was crystal clear that he, in an executive order, that he expected the Department of Justice to investigate what happened over the past several years with a goal of making sure it never happens again. Not with releasing names, not to somehow do damage to the agents or their families or prosecutors.
So are you, excuse me, my question is, what are you going to do with all these names? So are you then going to start investigating these investigators? Is that what's going to start happening with the thousands of names that you will be provided when you are confirmed, as I think you will?
We will
probably.
We will investigate what happened and why it happened, and certainly understanding the number of agents involved, why they were ordered to do what they did, why they did what they did, is part of our job as
so very instead of the FBI protecting our country, protecting all of its citizens, you are turning your attention to what's going on within your soon-to-be own department. Okay. In the past few weeks, dozens of non-political career officials in the Criminal Division, National Security Division, and elsewhere have been demoted or reassigned to areas outside their expertise. And in fact, you said that the DOJ is doing that. Why would the department want to purge these experienced non-political expert prosecutors?
I'm not there, Senator. I don't think it's a purge, from what I've read.
Well, when you get there, will you reverse these moves and return these expert prosecutors to their areas of expertise, if confirmed?
I am not going to commit to any decision that will be made before consulting with the folks that are there already.
So there are already all these people, hundreds of agents. The DOJ consists of thousands of investigators and prosecutors, and many of them are being shifted to doing other things. One can only survive, and I certainly do, that there's a reason for the names being disclosed, well, not disclosed, but being provided, and the fact that so many career people are being sent off to do other things, rather than, in my view, protecting the American public from lawbreakers. That includes white-collar crime, by the way. You know, where we know that that violent crime is going down, and yet the Department of Justice is going to be turning its attention away from white-collar crime and all the ways that the people in our country are being defrauded and taken to the cleaners. What kind of prosecution is going to occur there? So, you know what, not content with gutting the FBI and DOJ, from what I can see of experienced non-political leaders, the Trump administration has also halted all hiring at DOJ. It's not just DOJ, but across the board, freeze. And there are a lot of people across all of our departments, people who are on probation, and already those people on probation in the SBA that help small businesses have already been fired, several hundred of them. So what's going to happen when you take over? Are all of these people who are on probation in the Department of Justice going to be fired? And then they will not be replaced because there will be a hiring freeze. Is that what's going to be happening under your watch, Mr. Blanche?
I don't know, but if they're on probation, I don't believe it's actually even a firing. I mean, but I don't know what's going to happen. I'm not there.
Well, people on probation have already been fired in the SBA, and you have a lot of people on probation in the Justice Department. Let me just turn to one area that I am concerned about. You talk about the criminal, going after criminals. Well, there is a criminal division section, DOJ's child exploitation and obscenity section, that protects children by prosecuting those who create, distribute, and post child sexual abuse material. I think everybody on this committee, regardless of politics, agrees on the need to protect kids. But this section, like the rest of the DOJ, is subject to a hiring freeze and has probationary employees who likely will be fired. Mr. Blanche, can you think of any reason to reduce the number of prosecutors in the DOJ's child exploitation and obscenity section?
Virtually every prosecution in that area is done by U.S. attorneys' offices, by assistant U.S. attorneys' offices in the 94 offices. So I personally prosecuted those cases, as did people that worked with me. So I am very confident that the law is protecting our children.
So you will make
enforced.
sure that this section of the DOJ will have the full complement of investigators and prosecutors. Is that what you're testifying to?
I don't know what full complement means, but I can tell you
Well,
that the safety of our children
check
will...
what the numbers are here before the hiring freeze and before the people who are on probation get let go, because this is an area of prosecution and investigation that needs to happen. You testified, okay, you testified that you will follow the law, that there is no place for politics in the DOJ. The thing is, though, we have a president who thinks that the DOJ is his law firm and that all the lawyers in the DOJ are his lawyers. And so when you sit here and testify that you don't think he's going to ask any of you to do anything illegal, that pretty much defies belief. Because in the 26 executive orders that he issued on the day one of his, I have to say, regime, a lot of those are being challenged as being illegal. And some of them, I would say, are illegal on their face. We expect the Attorney General to say, you shouldn't issue this, like the one where he tried to prevent the, he tried to stop money that had already been appropriated by Congress. There's a law that prevents the president from doing that, and yet the DOJ let him issue this executive order. So when you sit here and say, all of you testify that you will follow the law, again, it's the law as President Trump sees it. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I mean, I do not agree with what you just said, Senator, respectfully.
Well, on behalf of the chair, Mr. Blanche, I will give you a moment to, the senator's out of time, but I'll give you a moment to explain why.
Thank you. This idea, the senator referred to the president of the United States as being part of regime. That's absolutely not true. He's the duly elected president of the United States. He has tremendous amount of power given to him not by me, but by the American people. And so to the extent that I say I will follow the law and that I have confidence that President Trump will never ask me to do something illegal or in violation of the law, it's again based upon my experience with him and my respect for the office of which he resides.
Thank you. Now, on behalf of the chair, I recognize Senator Tillis. Well, that's me. Now it's my turn. Mr. Blanche, I'm going to come to you for the bulk of my 7 minutes, but I actually would like to start with Ms. Slater. Ms. Slater, I've heard from countless stakeholders in the final days of the Biden administration. Politically motivated cases were tracked by the DOJ and actions not taken because they were proper or necessary for the pursuit of justice. It's my staff words. I've got something else here. I feel like the Biden administration and the Antitrust Division was trying to get some work done out the door. Can I get your commitment that we can look at whether or not there was political kind of getting the last things in and see if any of the decisions that were taken were appropriate? When you're confirmed, I'll be supporting your confirmation.
Thank you, Senator. With regards to all cases within the Antitrust Division, I commit to taking a
Well, I think it may be worthwhile. I don't know how far along they are, but it appears as though that at least from stakeholders I have in North Carolina, a few things were being rushed on the way out the door to prevent a different posture for the transitioning administration. So I would like that. I'm going to ask for the whole of DOJ, but in your case, the Antitrust Division was actually mentioned, I think, as well. Mr. Blanche, you caught my ear when you said 11 billion terabytes of data. In your opening statement, you said something to the effect that there was some near 11 terabytes of evidence or data. Would you go back through that again really quickly?
Yes, I was talking about everybody in the media and Jack Smith and his prosecutors and the court said that all we were trying to do was delay. Lost in all that was the fact that in just the 2 federal cases by Jack Smith, there was more than 11 terabytes of discovery dropped on us. That's what I meant.
11 terabytes is probably hard for most people to conceive of unless you were a records management geek early in your career, which I was. That 11 terabytes, single-spaced pages. Let's even assume that we print on the front and back. Do you have any idea how many pages of information that represents?
I can't say that I do, Senator.
If it was single-spaced and only printed on one side, it would be 3.6 billion pages. 3.6 billion pages. And people say that the president was slow rolling. When you get that dropped on the door, it's like, folks, that's just to give you an idea. It's more than would fill this room. And they were trying to expedite it. So I think clearly there seemed like that there were political motivations on the part of the administration. And also lawfare, I heard it referred to as a new term. It actually had its roots back in 1975 and then again in 2001, talking about how lawfare was being used by various countries to manipulate international courts and actually used against democratic nations. We're using it a little bit differently now, but I think there's no question that lawfare went on in the last administration. I want a commitment from you, though, to say that that ends with the end of the Biden administration.
I commit, absolutely.
And that no matter what the circumstance, there's no place for that. We have the opportunity to end the political physics. For every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction. I want people there prosecuting people of any political stripe, not just one. And you're going to go into a very, very important role. I've got your commitment. There will not even be a whiff of an investigation that appears to have a political motivation to it.
I commit to that.
Thank you. I also heard the January 6th rioters here, I call them thugs, the people who injured police officers. I've said it in this committee. I've said it on the Senate floor. I'll say it again. They were thugs who attacked Capitol police officers who protected every single one of us and every staff, and they all got hurt. I don't have any problem having a difference with the president on the what I consider to be the pardons that shouldn't have occurred for those who committed violence against a police officer. It's a red line for me. Nobody could change my mind, not even my wife. But there's almost an insinuation that you maybe thought it was a good idea or advised on it. So I'm asking you a question. Were you consulted by the president on the pardons, the blanket pardons?
I was not, no.
As a future member of the DOJ, what would be your position on anybody who does violence against police officers in the past or in the future?
They should be prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law.
And do you agree with me that anybody who was convicted or pleaded guilty to violence against a police officer owes a formal written apology to whoever they hurt in the process?
That is something I would think they should certainly consider doing.
Well, I guarantee you, if they come onto this Capitol grounds and I know they're here and they're spiking the football without an apology, I will track them down and make them feel like some of our members did on January the 6th. There's no place for it. No place whatsoever. So I have your commitment in the future that if you were ever advised to provide a pardon for anybody who committed violence against a police officer, what will your recommendation be to the president?
Well, I want to be careful, Senator. I very strongly believe that the power to pardon rests with President Trump, with President Biden, and not with me.
And President Biden, right. But what I'm saying is you're going to be in the world's most prestigious Justice Department that also has the world's gold standard for law enforcement. I believe that with the FBI. We always have to make sure the leaders in that department, either the FBI or the DOJ, always has a law-abiding police officer's back, period, end of story. So I want to ask you, hopefully you will, if you get advice, I just simply want to send the message to whoever advised the president on those January 6th, those who were either pleaded guilty or were convicted in a court of law for injuring a police officer, that's not a fact pattern you will be a part of in the future in making a recommendation if asked.
Violence against law enforcement is never something that should be tolerated.
And I think it's important to hear that because I'm hearing it time and time again. Everybody who's coming before the committee, Ms. Slater, I'm surprised even in antitrust you didn't get the question. But it's a false narrative. Anybody who comes before the DOJ, for a DOJ in any capacity, better answer the same question. Thank you. On behalf of the chair, I'll give it back to the chair.
Thank you for taking over. Senator Coons.
Thank you, Chairman Grassley, and thank you to both of our nominees for your public service, and thank you to your families. I suspect this has been a long day, and it is soon going to come to an end. Mr. Blanche, in particular, thank you for your work in the Southern District of New York and in the Attorney's Office fighting violent crime, and Ms. Slater for your long service at the FTC enforcing our nation's antitrust laws. You've both been nominated to take senior leadership positions in a Department of Justice that I view as being currently in crisis. Career prosecutors have been fired because President Trump didn't like the cases they worked on. Dozens of senior DOJ leaders have been pushed out or reassigned. FBI agents fear mass purges for their work simply because they were assigned to cases related to January 6th, a day, as my colleague, Senator Tillis, was just reminding all of us, when law enforcement officers were brutally attacked, and Attorney General Bondi issued a directive demanding the department go on a witch hunt for past weaponization and calling DOJ attorneys the president's lawyers. As I consider your nominations, I need to know that you will serve with independence and integrity, and I am concerned about some of these recent developments. Ms. Slater, if you would just answer a question I've asked many others, and I understand Mr. Blanche has been asked. Who does the DOJ Antitrust Division work for?
The American people.
Thank you. And do you consider the Assistant Attorney General for Antitrust to be one of the president's lawyers?
No, sir.
Thank you. I think it's important that you both maintain the clarity with which the Attorney General answered this in her confirmation hearing, that you work for the Constitution of the people of the United States, not for any particular president. Mr. Blanche, if you're confirmed and one of the prosecutors comes to you with an airtight case, satisfies burden of proof to take to a jury, but the president asks you to drop that case for reasons unrelated to that investigation, would you?
I mean, Senator,
It's not a hypothetical. We just saw it in the front page this week.
I do believe it's a hypothetical, Senator, and I don't, when you describe a case as, quote, airtight, as a former prosecutor, I don't know what that means.
What was the basis for abandoning the case against the mayor of New York?
I have no idea.
Well, I'll tell you that the press is widely reporting, forgive me, the press is widely reporting that was because he pledged to cooperate with deportation, not because there was concern or question about the foundation of it. If you're asked by the White House to initiate a prosecution that you don't believe is legally justified, would you?
I will follow the law, period. There's no other way to answer that.
And if, in your view, the law does not support the prosecution?
It's not just my view, it's law. So my view is one of many at the Department of Justice for sure, and I will tell you that I will follow the law. I don't believe what the media says, just as a matter of practice. So to the extent that the media reports something about Mayor Adams or about other things that are happening,
well,
I'll wait till I'm
that
there.
His prosecution's been dropped, correct?
Pardon me?
The prosecution against him, the case, has been dropped.
What I was referring to is your statement about why it was dropped based on what the media was reporting. I just don't accept that.
Let me move forward. President Trump signed an executive order on Monday pausing prosecutions of individuals accused of bribing foreign government officials. The law that our president unilaterally decided didn't need to be enforced is the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act. It's been on the books 50 years. In 2024 alone, DOJ and the SEC brought in more than $1 billion in fines and penalties. Total sanctions over the 50 years since it was enacted, over $30 billion. Does the president have the authority under the Constitution to choose which laws passed by Congress will be enforced or which laws will have their enforcement suspended?
I don't believe that that's what the executive order said, Senator. It directed the Attorney General to pause and to take a look at how investigations were being investigated, how prosecutions were going along, and then to report back to make sure that those investigations and prosecutions are being done in a consistent way with the president's agenda. That's not that's not saying don't follow Congress's directive about laws that have been passed. It's saying, Attorney General, take a pause, figure out what we're doing and why we're doing it, and then we're going to do it the right way.
How long do you believe that pause to be?
I don't know, Senator.
I think it's 180 days. And I think it sends a message about enforcement trajectory and priority. But let me move to another issue that I think is also quite current. Last month, President Trump fired more than a dozen inspectors general. This committee, chairs of both parties, have strongly supported whistleblowers, oversight, and inspectors general. Just yesterday, President Trump fired the IG at USAID right after he published a report saying that funding cuts at AID made it more likely that U.S. funds would be diverted to the hands of terrorist groups. In 2022, Congress passed a law, not a suggestion, not a note, not a piece of whimsy, a statute, a law saying at least 30 days before the removal of any inspector general, the president must provide Congress with, and I quote, a substantive rationale including detailed and case-specific reasons. President Trump provided no notice to Congress and no justification. You're a lawyer. How many days has the president been in office?
Since January 20th.
Which is how many days fewer than 30?
I'm a lawyer, not a math guy. But
I'll just put it
is fewer than 30.
It is a matter of mathematical impossibility for the president to have followed the statute and provided us with the required notice, correct?
I don't know.
If he hasn't been president for 30 days, how could he have given us 30 days notice as required by the statute?
He obviously did not.
He obviously did not. Do you think he broke the law by firing these attorneys general, these inspectors general?
As I was saying before, I don't know. I wasn't part of the decisions that he and the White House counsels made in making that decision. I don't want to speak to whether the president broke the law. I just don't know.
But you know that he hasn't been president for 30 days.
Yes.
And I'm telling you that the relevant statute for the removal of any inspector general requires prior notice to Congress with specific reason. Ms. Slater, you're a practicing attorney. Does it seem to you, just on the face of the facts of this instance, that the president broke the law in firing a dozen inspectors general without duly required notice to Congress? The next time we have both of you in front of us, I hope you are familiar. I recognize there are differences of views about exactly what's happened in the past or who made what decisions. But you are in front of us for two of the most important positions in the Department of Justice. And we have, on a bipartisan basis, long stood up for oversight and inspectors general as exactly the people who keep federal agencies on the straight and narrow. And at a moment when there's a whole lot of noise and mess about USAID being corrupt and full of fraud, exactly the person responsible for oversight of AID was just fired yesterday without the required notice or justification to Congress. President Trump broke the law, and I need to hear that you recognize that.
Senator, I'm not going to give you the answer you're looking for then. I refuse to sit here and talk about something that I'm not familiar with and give an answer to you that just because you want it. I'm not going to do that.
Before I call on Senator Blackburn, I'd make a point about the discussion you just had. Number one, the president could abide by the law by putting the person on administrative leave and writing us a letter why he's doing it, and the law would be abided by. The second thing is, if you look at all the corruption that's going on in USAID and all the waste of taxpayers' money, this guy should have been fired. Blackburn. No, well, no, before you go, I got one other thing. It's a letter for the record from 70 former Justice Department officials supporting Mr. Blanche's nomination. It reads, in part, Mr. Blanche is a special nominee in that he brings decades of experience both as a prosecutor and defense attorney as a role of Deputy Attorney General. These experiences have given Mr. Blanche a deep respect for and familiarity with the Department of Justice, rule of law, and the principles of the United States Constitution. Mr. Blanche's experience, professionalism, integrity, and deep expertise make him the perfect candidate for the role. End of quote. I'll put it in the record without objection.
Mr. Chairman.
Yeah.
You correctly argued that the president could have cured this fault by putting them on administrative leave and then giving us the detailed notice.
Yeah.
It's my understanding that is not what happened in this case.
No,
that's why I'm raising it so forcefully.
You're right, it didn't happen. I'm just trying to make the president's job easier. Easy.
And I'm trying to point out that in the case of inspectors general, which we all view as critical and valuable, he did not comply with the law that we wrote.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Ms. Blackburn.
I appreciate the recognition, and welcome to each of you. I appreciate the time that you gave me in my office to talk about issues that are so important to all of us and to our nation. And I appreciate that Senator Coons brought up the weaponization of the DOJ. We have lived through 4 years of this. We have watched the DOJ sit quiet. We have watched our colleagues say not a word when they knew Joe Biden was not making the decisions, when they knew full well things that they were parroting were not accurate, when they knew that there were 2 tiers of justice, 2 tiers of access, 2 tiers of treatment, and they said not a word. And so now they are trying to say, oh my goodness, look at what is happening. What is happening to my colleagues? The American people gave a strong vote and a mandate to President Donald Trump to straighten this mess out and end it, and to get this bureaucracy under control. That is why we have DOJ, that the American people are cheering, because they're tired tired of this. They are tired of paying for a government that is not responsive to the needs of the American people. So yes, indeed, they watched the DOJ be weaponized, show favor to some and disfavor to others, like parents that were going to a PTA or a school board meeting, or going after Catholics who were pro-life. And they are tired of what the Biden administration gave them. So yes, cleaning up, you better believe it. Is it time to clean house? You better believe it. Is cleaning house going to continue? Absolutely, and it should, because the American people voted for that. They want that. They deserve that. And I am pleased that we will have each of you over at the DOJ. Let's stay with this, Mr. Blanche, on the two tiers of justice and the weaponization. So there must be bipartisan concern over that. So tell me, what are some things you can do day one to make certain that we end this two tiers of justice? I know it is a priority for General Bondi, and I appreciate that she went to work day one on this. So tell me what you do.
I think the first thing I can do is support what the memos that Attorney General Bondi put out on day one. And the biggest issue that has to stop, and it already has stopped, and it can't ever happen again, is outside influence, especially political outside influence, having any role in the decision that the Department of Justice makes to prosecute a case. It just can't. And if it does, then that is not a righteous, that is not a just prosecution, period.
I appreciate that. I know Senator Lee talked with you about violent crime, and we have seen such an uptick. Part of this is related to the gangs that are coming into the country illegally. We had a raid take place in Nashville yesterday. 8 were indicted, 2 were Agua. This was on human trafficking. And beginning to break apart this ring is so very important. But these soft on crime policies have not served our nation well. In Memphis, we have an issue with violent crime and an uptick that is there. We've had a DA Mulroy over there that just will not prosecute these crimes and bring them forward. So we know that in President Trump's first term, there was a decrease in crime, violent crime, 17%. In the first year of Joe Biden's term, 43%. What a hike. The difference was soft on crime policies. And President Trump had a policy in his first term that federal prosecutors, and I'm going to quote, should charge and pursue the most serious, readily provable offenses. And I think that is something that we need to return to. So will the department return to that policy for their leadership for you and General Bondi?
I believe it already has. Yes, Senator.
Well, and the American people are ready to see it. I think that we have a bunch of security moms all across the country, and they are sick and tired of worried about their kids going to an event or trying to go to shopping or going to school and getting carjacked or mugged when they're out at night. Ms. Slater, I want to come to you. I passed legislation when it was in the House before I came over here, the BOTS Act, and it prohibits ticket scalpers from using software to buy high volumes of tickets. And the FTC sat on their hands on this legislation for 4 years, and they have taken only one enforcement action. Now, to a lot of people, they may say, why are you so worried about ticket scalpers? Well, in Nashville, Tennessee, this is a problem. And we want to make certain that fans are able to get these tickets. And we've also got the Main Event Act that Senator Lujan and I have done, which would strengthen the Bots Act. But I know that you can't get into some specifics because of the ongoing Ticketmaster lawsuit that you are going to inherit. But I'd love for you to talk about some of the issues that you have observed in the ticketing market and steps that can be taken to clean this up.
Senator, thanks for the question. I know it's a hugely important issue for your state, but for all consumers, frankly. Yes. And so I totally acknowledge that. As with many pocketbook issues, we've seen a lot of prices go up and not down in some markets. Regarding the Bots Act, I have the good fortune to have sitting behind me the chairman of the FTC, Andrew Ferguson, and I can absolutely commit to you that I will be working in close partnership with him, not just on this matter, this legislation, but hopefully all cases across the board, because we do have two antitrust agencies, and so coordination is really important. I would also like to visit with your staff to better understand the issues with the Bots Act as they might see it.
We just need enforcement. We have had an FTC that chose not to enforce. Thank you. My time's expired.
Yeah, thank you. Senator Padilla.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Colleagues, I'm going to pick up where Senator Coons left off. Not because I wish to be repetitive, but I think the issue is simply just too important. When the President of the United States violates the law, it's important to call it out. And let me underscore, this isn't when the President of the United States strays from historical norms in how he or she does the job. It's not when the President does different than what's been standard practice for prior presidents. I'm talking about when the President of the United States violates the law. Now, on the issue of inspectors general, in case folks watching at home aren't exactly sure what inspector generals do or what purpose they serve, inspectors general serve to hold executive branch agencies accountable. They work to prevent corruption and to make sure that an agency is spending money as it should be by identifying fraud, waste, and abuse, and so much more. And over the years, Congress has taken steps to ensure the independence of inspectors general. As Senator Coons referenced, it was in 2022 when our chairman, Senator Grassley, worked with Senator Peters in a bipartisan fashion to advance the Securing Inspector General Independence Act, which requires a president to give written notice and reasoning of their decision to dismiss or transfer an inspector general at least 30 days prior. It's been established that President Trump hasn't even been in office for 30 days. Now, Mr. Blanche, when you walked into my office, you repeatedly told me that you will always follow the law. Your words, quote, full stop. And you've repeated that same message here today. It's numerically, mathematically impossible for President Trump to have abided by the law in dismissing inspectors general. Yes or no?
My answer remains the same. I'm not going to comment on what the decision made by the White House counsel and President Trump and what he did.
I'm not talking about how they reached their decision. And you clearly know this is not a hypothetical. He didn't give Congress 30 days notice. He violated the law, and I'm disappointed that you're failing to acknowledge that. Let me move on. As Senator Blackburn referenced a minute ago in part of her comments, we're concerned about violence in this country. I'm especially concerned about gun violence in this country. As I hope you've learned, the Department of Justice plays a key role in enforcing federal firearm laws, prosecuting gun trafficking, and defending regulations in court. Mexican President Sheinbaum has stated that President Trump agreed to work on reducing the flow of guns into Mexico as part of the recent deal to delay tariffs for a month. As Deputy Attorney General, how do you plan to uphold that commitment?
I think I agree with what the senator said, that it's extremely important to keep guns out of the hands of folks that cannot have them, especially criminals, especially people in armed robbery, drug dealing, murders.
Specific suggestions, ideas, strategies on how to do that.
I mean, I've said this a couple times, empowering our U.S. attorneys, working with state and local law enforcement to make sure that our crime, that when there's crimes committed that belong in federal court, that they go to federal court. If they belong in state court, they go to state court. But it's been done before, all right? And it can be done again.
So I don't want to put words in your mouth, but am I hearing a commitment to prioritize enforcement against illegal gun sales and trafficking, particularly in light of the rising concern about ghost guns?
Those are all concerns. What I was talking about is violent crime oftentimes used with guns, not always, in our cities. And I think it is extremely important that we focus as much energy as we can on fixing that.
Yeah. And it's not just in cities, by the way. Sadly, I'm not talking about schools.
Agreed.
A lot of school shootings, but in communities, urban, rural, everywhere in between. In my time remaining, a question on a different topic. You know, my colleagues on the other side of the aisle have taken issue with us voicing our concern about President Trump filling the top ranks of the Justice Department with his friends, his allies, and personal attorneys. I can only imagine how they would have reacted if a Democratic president installed his own personal criminal defense attorneys as Attorney General, as Deputy Attorney General, as Principal Associate Deputy Attorney General. I know Senator Blumenthal raised questions about conflicts of interest earlier and how you would serve if your understanding of the law differed from what President Trump desired from you and the Department of Justice. This topic came up when now Attorney General Bondi was with us for her confirmation hearing. And when asked what she would do if a conflict of interest arose with respect to her previous representation of President Trump, and in that hearing, she repeatedly said that she would follow Department of Justice protocol. Now, in case you're not familiar, let me share with you that protocol would be to then have the Deputy Attorney General to step into her place. Except if you're confirmed, that wouldn't be the case because you've served President Trump in a personal capacity as well. And your deputy would also be in that conflict scenario. So can you tell me just how far down the line under President Trump's Department of Justice do we have to go until we have someone who isn't conflicted because they served as the president's personal attorney?
Well, respectfully, Senator, I don't agree with the premise that the same conflicts that apply to me will apply to Attorney General Bondi. I don't believe she was ever his personal attorney. I know she represented him in the past administration, and I agree with what General Bondi said. There are very smart people at the department that will make sure that we are doing the right thing when it comes to recusals, but I don't think it has to go very far down.
So last question, I know my time is just about up. It's a yes or no. Are you aware of any administration history with a similar degree of cascading conflicts of interest, real or perceived?
I don't think there's cascading conflicts of interest in this administration.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Senator Brett, first, just a comment about this business of IGs because I am in the middle of it. I'd just like to remind people that when I complained about the firing of IGs in the previous administration, I didn't get any help from the Democrats on that. I have a letter in with Senator Durbin in a bipartisan way to try to get some answers on this issue and make the point that the law isn't being abided by. Also, before I call on Senator Brett, I'd like to enter into the record a letter from over 100 alumni of the Southern District of New York who worked alongside Mr. Blanche and know him best, the people who signed this letter, quote, cover the gamut of intellectual, political, and legal ideologies, end of quote, and then further quote, Todd's experience, character, intellect, openness to dialogue, and long-standing love of and belief in the mission of DOJ make him eminently qualified to serve as Deputy Attorney General. As a Southern District AUSA and supervisor, Todd embodied those virtues and understood how essential they are to the administration of justice. Without objection, this will be included. No objection? Go ahead, Senator Brett.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman. I do want to add to the list of things that Senator Blackburn pointed out that my colleagues on the other side of the aisle failed to point out in the last 4 years. I mean, you had President Biden who said, the Supreme Court, this is a quote, tried to block me from relieving student loan, but they didn't stop me. I'm going to keep going. I just relieved student debt for over 5 million Americans after the Supreme Court had said something totally different. Additionally, we can't forget that at the end of his term, he tried to add an amendment to the U.S. Constitution. So in addition to the list she gave, there are much more examples. Look, I want to turn first to Mrs. Slater and to both of you. Congratulations on your nomination and welcome to your family. I know that y'all are very proud to have them in this position and their willingness to serve the country. Sitting up here, I can tell you it's not just you that serves, it's your entire family. So thank you for your willingness to be a part of this. Ms. Slater, look, I really enjoyed our conversation. I want to touch on an issue that we did discuss in our meeting. As the daughter of 2 small business owners, I constantly look at what's happening in our country and think, you know, how does this affect the little guy? How do we make sure that main streets can thrive? And even in a place like our defense community or our shipbuilding community, where it's been declassified that China can build ships at 232 times the speed of America, you know, making sure that our small businesses, our entrepreneurs have an opportunity to thrive and create and innovate, not only living their American dream, but providing such an important pillar of our entire society, I think is really important. I'd like to know, how do you view the Antitrust Division's role with respect to ensuring that these small businesses and entrepreneurs can thrive and compete in today's economy?
Well, thank you for the question, Senator. I really did enjoy visiting with you as well. And thanks for your kind words about families. It's very important. In broad strokes, the role of the Antitrust Division, if done right, is to keep markets competitive. And if we can do that, and if we can play a role in ensuring that because markets are competitive, the barriers to entry are relatively low, and there's opportunities for small businesses to enter, to scale up if they're online, to expand if they're brick and mortar, then that's a really important function that we can serve in that regard.
Absolutely, and do I have your commitment to continue to look for ways to ensure that those barriers are removed and so people can be a part of the American dream?
Yes, Senator.
Thank you. Mr. Blanche, I'd like to begin with an issue we also discussed and one that I discussed with Attorney General Bondi during her hearing, and that is the Executive Office of Immigration Review. And obviously that oversees our nation's immigration courts and is housed at DOJ. As I mentioned during Attorney General Bondi's hearing, during the Biden administration, the court backlog grew from 1.4 million in FY21 all the way to 3.5 million in FY24. During the Biden administration, there seemed to be a kind of sort of a culture that was fostered of just not completing cases. And I say that because if you look at the numbers from FY21 to FY24, immigration judges failed to adjudicate over 340,000 asylum claims. And I want to put that in perspective for you. If you take the previous 6 fiscal years combined, that is 26 times higher than all of those put together. And so during the first Trump administration, though, what we saw them actually put in kind of a more effective system to look at ways to ensure that we were establishing a metrics-based system for these immigration judges and that we were actually looking to reduce the abuse of case continuances. It made a difference. Unfortunately, the Biden administration did not continue you that. So when you're confirmed, you're going to oversee the day-to-day operations of DOJ, and I would like to know, will you commit to me to looking at this, to taking a look at what is not working, to looking at what the Trump administration did previously and figure out how we can get this back on track?
Of course, absolutely, Senator. Yes.
Thank you. Will you also commit to reevaluating the Biden administration's decision policies that have encouraged the use of this administrative closures of immigration cases and return this EOIR to the posture of actually adjudicating and completing these cases?
Yes, I will work with Attorney General Bondi and for sure look at that, yes.
Excellent. In a similar vein, I wanted to note that I was heartened to see Attorney General Bondi's February 5th memo directing DOJ to the extent allowed by law to end the funding for sanctuary cities that flout our nation's immigration laws. The memo also stated that DOJ will take appropriate legal action to challenge sanctuary jurisdictions, the laws, the policies, and the actions around our country. These sanctuary jurisdictions and their reckless policies undermine the safety of all Americans, and they have no business receiving taxpayer dollars and should be held accountable for their decisions to violate the law. I know that you'll work closely with Attorney General Bondi on this issue, and I just wanted to say thank you, and you have my full support. Lastly, Mr. Blanche, I wanted to raise one more issue that I also raised with Attorney General Bondi, but I think it's really important. I, along with my colleagues here on both sides of the aisle, I'm sure, have experienced DOJ's total lack of responsiveness when it comes to congressional oversight in recent years. In my case, I had a letter to Attorney General Garland regarding the failure to enforce 18 U.S.C. Section 1507 at the home of our Supreme Court justices, and it went unanswered for over a year. As you remember, after the leaked Dobbs decision, they allowed them to picket and parade, which 1507 says you absolutely cannot do with the intent to influence an outcome. When I finally did receive a response, it didn't even include any actual answers to the questions I raised, and in fact, it didn't even attempt to answer them. We had slides from where the U.S. Marshals were actually directed to and encouraged, actively discouraged, of making arrests. And so will you commit to me that DOJ under the new leadership won't follow this same pattern over the last 4 years and will instead work to be responsive to congressional oversight and efficiency in a timely manner and get to the bottom of what happened and why Section 1507 was not followed by in the way that it should have been?
Yes, I commit to that.
Okay. Senator Welch.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank both of the nominees, and I'll start, Ms. Slater, with you, and then speak with you, Mr. Blanche, if that's okay. Ms. Slater, first of all, Julie Brill, who is a great Vermonter, was an FTC commissioner, thinks you're great. I think Julie Brill is great, so you've got something going for you, okay? Inflation is just a wicked challenge for everyday Vermonters trying to pay their bills, and it popped again today. Twice as high as last month. My view is that the role that you would play would have a major impact on whether we can deal with the market consolidation that is allowing entities to have enormous amount of pricing power and abusing that pricing power at the expense of folks that all of us represent. So I just want to ask you a few questions about that. Healthcare, incredibly expensive. Private equity is now getting in healthcare, not to deliver services, but to monetize the profit, take it for shareholders, and not reinvest it in the healthcare system. I'm going to give an example. Stewart Healthcare in Massachusetts. It's a Catholic health care system with 6 hospitals. Private equity purchased Stewart in 2010. It was they bought it for the real estate, and they ran it into the ground. It goes out of business. And moms who thought they had an appointment to take care of their sick child suddenly found out the hospital's closed. And those guys got out of town. Stewart just wrecked it. That's my view. What's the role of private equity in healthcare when they don't reinvest? They just squeeze and turn it into a real estate play and then leave high and dry a lot of folks in rural areas who want to get healthcare.
Thanks, Senator. I agree with you that healthcare markets are crucial markets for an antitrust standpoint. And I do commit to keeping a close eye to the extent that the DOJ has jurisdiction.
Please do that. We've got to have the healthcare system be about healthcare, not enriching Wall Street, all right? Ag, that's a big deal for us in Vermont. We got farmers. They love nothing more than working the land to try to feed Vermonters and feed Americans. Incredible consolidation. 6 grocery store chains have 65%, 83% of milk sales with 3 companies, poultry at 60%. For beef, it's between 80 and 85%. Do you see the consolidation in the agriculture industry and the food processing industry as something that is a factor in increasing prices so that people have sticker shock when they check out at the grocery line?
Well, there are many variables that go into pricing, but competition or lack of competition is certainly one of them.
All right, so you'll stay on that. I appreciate that. Mr. Blanche, look, you're a qualified guy. I am amazed at your story. You started out with nothing. You didn't go to the Ivy League schools, and you ended up with this extraordinary career at major law firms who, in years past, would have never looked at a guy like you, and I know your wife helped you a lot, so there's so much to admire. And by the way, I was a public defender. I defended bad people. I got assigned to those cases, and I assume that you respect the fact that I took the assignment.
Absolutely.
It would never hold it against a public defender that they were defending in the court of law a person who was accused of a serious crime, right?
I would not.
Right. And my view on the FBI is it's the same thing. I support the FBI. I so admire those folks, the men and women. And if an FBI agent, I'm a worker there, and I get assigned to a case by my boss, is there any reason in the world that I should pay a price because I did my job as assigned?
No, and I don't think that that's what's happening. I'm not there. I see the same memos, read the same articles, but I don't think that that's what's happening.
I know you weren't there, but let me just ask you, we have got to stand up for those folks. And you're going to have a major job. And my hope, I don't want to get in an argument, I respect you a lot, but my hope is you're going to defend the men and women at the FBI who just did their job.
The men and women of the FBI that just did their job, of course, absolutely.
All right, and getting assigned to a case is one. Another thing, you were in the Southern District. You know, I was a young lawyer, and I remember looking around for jobs. I worked for, I noticed some of the places you worked, kind of fancy. But there's nothing better than the Southern District, right? That's the crown jewel of the federal prosecution, right? And hasn't it been the tradition in the Southern District, and actually in the whole U.S. attorney system, that there's independence in those local offices? You know, there's a chain of command, but there's a lot of independence, correct?
Well, I agree with what you said. There's a chain of command and there is independence, yes.
All right. So what I just saw with the dismissal of the Adams charge, that was directed by D.C., correct? This is Mayor Adams.
I have the same information you have. It appears it was, yes.
That's right.
I don't know, beyond what I've
See, this is the concern that all of us have. We're hearing from our colleagues about weaponization, and we heard from you in the experience you had with President Trump. On our side, it's like an effort to erase something that really happened. That was January 6th. And the apprehension that a lot of us have is that the issue here of lawfare and weaponization is just still continuing, where you have the president saying, my Justice Department, and he's telling, basically through his agents, telling, let's dismiss the corruption charge against the mayor of New York City. So I just want to put that out there to let you know there's good faith concern here on both sides about this use of the term weaponization and the use of the term lawfare. And I don't know if I have time, Mr. Chairman, for one other question. Mr. Chairman, I just didn't know if I had time for one more question. I just wanted to ask Mr. Blanche, when he goes on that triathlon, I guess you went with you and your father-in-law?
No, my daddy's right there.
Your father? All right. The next
it was a full Ironman, Senator.
All right. The next time you go, the only person up on the dais who can join you as Senator Grassley. I yield back.
Fair enough.
In the great movie Casablanca, we encounter the phrase, "I'm shocked to find gambling here." I have to say, sitting through this hearing and listening to our Democrat colleagues, say I'm shocked that anyone would think there was weaponization at the Department of Justice or the FBI. It makes me wonder where my Democrat colleagues have been the last 4 years. In over 200 years of our nation's history, we've had 47 presidents. Mr. Blanche, of those 47 presidents, how many not named Donald John Trump have been indicted?
0.
How many presidents not named Donald Trump have been prosecuted?
0.
How many not named Donald J. Trump have had FBI agents arrive at their home and rifle through their home?
0.
Throughout 4 years of the brazen weaponization of the Department of Justice and the FBI, Senate Democrats sat by meekly and mutely. Understand, President Trump wasn't indicted once, he wasn't indicted twice, he wasn't indicted 3 times, 4 separate times by partisan Democrat prosecutors who were terrified that the American people would vote to re-elect him. You heard just a minute ago my friend from Vermont ask you to defend the good men and women of the FBI. I agree, you should defend the good men and women of the FBI, and I'll tell you, I've heard from FBI agents who were horrified at an institution that had built a reputation for integrity being cheapened by being turned into a political weapon to attack the opposition of the Democrat White House. The single biggest thing, Mr. Blanche, you can do to protect the good men and women of the FBI is to restore integrity to the FBI and end the weaponization that has caused half of the country to no longer trust what used to be the premier law enforcement agency in the world. For 4 years, we saw the Biden Justice Department happily weaponize that agency to go after their political opponents. We saw Mark Houck, a pro-life protester who faced a pro-abortion protester who screamed and shoved his son, and he pushed the man back. In response for pushing a man back who had screamed at his 12-year-old son, the Biden Department of Justice and FBI sent an army of FBI agents at the crack of dawn to his house, machine guns drawn, to arrest him in front of his 7 kids. Mr. Houck had, by the way, offered, through his counsel, to turn himself in. In your many years as a prosecutor, have you ever sent an army of FBI agents to arrest someone who's offered to turn themselves in peacefully?
No.
And yet no one at the Department of Justice seemed troubled by that. They happily authorized that. And not a single Democrat on this committee, to the best of my knowledge, has ever asked one damn question about it. When the National Association of School Boards sent a letter to Joe Biden complaining that parents were unhappy by their radical policies that were happening to children, within days, the White House sent that to the Department of Justice, and days later, the Attorney General sent a formal memo to the FBI saying, target parents. I want you to go after parents who are exercising their First Amendment rights. And we've had moms and dads all over the country who've had the G-men come knocking on their door because they had the temerity to exercise free speech. Is targeting moms and dads who go to school boards and engage in peaceful speech, is that a permissible use of law enforcement?
Not in my view, Senator.
You know, if you look at this election, There are a number of issues on which there is a clear and unmistakable mandate. There's an unmistakable mandate to secure the border. Because for 4 years, Joe Biden and the Democrats defied the law. Federal immigration law is clear. Illegal immigrants who are apprehended shall be detained and shall be deported. Mr. Blanche, when the law uses the word shall, is that typically mandatory?
It is.
And what Joe Biden did is something no president in the history of our country has ever done. He refused to follow the law, released millions of illegal immigrants into America. He released murderers. He released rapists. He released child predators. He released Venezuelan gang members. If Joe Biden and the Democrats had been willing to follow the law, Laken Riley would still be alive instead of being murdered by a criminal illegal alien released by Joe Biden and the Democrats. If Joe Biden and the Democrats had followed the law, Jocelyn Nungary in my hometown of Houston, beautiful 12-year-old girl, raped and murdered by 2 illegal immigrants, Venezuelan gang members, Joe Biden had in custody and released. No president has ever done what Joe Biden and the Democrats did. And by the way, not a one of my Democrat colleagues, to the best of my recollection, ever asked one question about why the Department of Justice was refusing to follow the law. Mr. Blanche, is the Department of Justice doing its job if it refuses to follow the law and defies federal immigration law?
Not in my view, it is not.
We have a clear and unmistakable mandate to the voters. We will secure the border. We will stop releasing criminals and rapists and child molesters into our community. And there is a clear mandate. We will end the weaponization of the Department of Justice and the FBI. Does this committee have your commitment that you will be faithful to the law, to the Constitution, and you will bring integrity back to the Department of Justice?
Absolutely.
One final question, Mrs. Slater. You and I have talked about how I think the single biggest threat to free speech is big tech censorship. Please give this committee your views on the relevance of antitrust law to stopping big tech censorship, silencing the free speech of American people, and what are the conceivable array of tools and arrays of remedies under the antitrust laws?
Well, thank you, Senator. We did indeed talk about this, and I think we also agree that there are other tools available beyond antitrust. But what we agreed in principle is that in markets that are highly concentrated, conservative viewpoints or anybody's viewpoint can be quickly throttled or suppressed when there is market power on back of that. Someone can be disappeared from the internet quite easily when there are only 2 platforms providing news, for example, to the American people.
And so the remedies are potential remedies?
Well, as with any antitrust enforcement matter, it's up to us to put together a case, bring it before the courts, and then we can have a remedies discussion. It goes before a judge in the case of the DOJ.
Senator Schiff.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Welcome to you both. Mr. Blanche, you and I have some common friends from your time in the Southern District of New York who speak highly of you. I take issue with my colleague, Senator Welch, in saying that SDNY is the flagship. Clearly, it's the Central District of California. But notwithstanding what I've heard from our mutual friends, I am gravely concerned in listening to your testimony, the degree to which you sound like you're still representing Donald Trump as his lawyer. Your criticism of the department, for example, filing a superseding indictment in the January 6th prosecution after a Supreme Court case so that the indictment would conform with that opinion, is the kind of objection I would expect to hear from a criminal defense lawyer, not the kind of statement I would expect to hear from a deputy attorney general. So let me just ask you, you have not been confirmed yet. Are you still Donald Trump's lawyer?
I mean, yes, my attorney-client relationship with President Trump remains. Yes. The cases I was representing him on, to the extent that there's anything going on like the appeal in Manhattan, I'm not part of that.
But you're still representing him as you sit here today.
Well, I mean, representing him, there's no active matters. So
Correct, but you're still his lawyer.
I have an attorney-client relationship with President Trump.
And even if you're confirmed and you're no longer representing him as a criminal defendant, even then you still have continuing moral obligations as a member of the bar, legal obligations, to your former client, correct?
Like everybody at the Department of Justice with every one of their former clients.
Correct. So you'd have a continuing duty of loyalty and confidentiality when it comes to his communications, correct?
Yes.
Now, Ms. Bondi, as Attorney General, one of her first acts, established the Orwellian-sounding weaponization working group. In her memo, it says that the work of this weaponization group will be supported by the Office of the Deputy Attorney General. That is the office that you will occupy. Would you agree that it would be a blatant conflict of interest as his criminal defense lawyer, as someone who has a continuing legal obligation to him as a former client, for you to participate in any of the work of that group as it pertains to the January 6th case that you represented him, or the Mar-a-Lago case where you represent him, or Alvin Bragg's office where you represent him? You would agree that that would be a very blatant conflict of interest?
I don't necessarily agree with that. There will be a conflict of interest potentially, but I quibble with the word blatant. And it depends on,
okay.
I mean,
take out the word blatant, but isn't it a clear conflict of interest? You've represented him in these cases. You acknowledge you still have a continuing obligation to him in these cases. How could you possibly oversee an investigation or review of the prosecutors in these cases when you handled them? How is that not the most obvious conflict of interest?
I am not saying I can or I cannot. I'm saying I'm not going to say to you today, Senator, yes, there's a blatant conflict of interest.
Well, why?
I don't know what the work is.
Well, can't you acknowledge that if you're asked to supervise cases involving your own cases, that would be a conflict of interest?
That's a very different hypothetical. Certainly.
No, it's not hypothetical. You're subject to the order of the Attorney General now to support that working group. That working group is going to look at the January 6th cases and the Mar-a-Lago case, the cases you worked on. So can you acknowledge it would be a conflict for you to oversee that work?
What I'm not acknowledging is the broad strokes you're giving it. That work, for example. There will be conflicts, and I will not violate my ethical obligations.
Well, let me just ask you with great specificity, will you recuse yourself from overseeing the January 6th case, the Mar-a-Lago case, and the Alvin Bragg case? Will you recuse yourself from the working group's supervision of those investigations?
I will follow the rules as told to me by the experts, career prosecutors in the department when it comes to every recusal.
I've heard that.
But it's true.
Well, it may be true in the abstract.
No, it's not abstract. It's true.
Well, here's the thing, Mr. Blanche, which you well know. You may very well get some opinion of an ethics lawyer appointed by the administration to tell you that you can exercise your discretion. If you believe it's a conflict, you can say you won't participate. If you don't, you can participate. So you may have discretion. So I'm asking you, how will you exercise that discretion? Will you recuse yourself from overseeing an investigation into matters where you are his lawyer? That shouldn't be hard.
You just gave a purely hypothetical, because the
hypothetical this is not hypothetical. This is in black and white. It says, and I will read it, I hereby establish the weaponization working group, which will be led by the Office of the Attorney General and supported by the Office of the Deputy Attorney General. So this is what you're going to be asked to do. If you are given the discretion of overseeing cases in which you are his lawyer, will you recuse yourself?
It depends. The hypothetical you just described said that a career ethics attorney tells me I do not have to recuse for whatever reason, because again, we are talking about hypotheticals. If the career Justice Department attorney says to me, you do not have to recuse yourself, I'm not going to sit here today and say that I will still say I will recuse myself.
I mean, that answers my question. You don't think it's a conflict of interest sufficient that you would sitting here today, tell me that you Yep. No, I get it. I find it remarkable where we are.
Well, you're restating something I didn't say, Senator.
No, I find it remarkable that you feel there's any world in which you could somehow participate in an investigation of people where you represented the president in that same investigation.
I didn't say that.
Well, you're not willing to commit to recusal, so that means you're willing to entertain supervising that work. So that tells me something. But let me move on, because I think you've made your position clear. Let me ask you very specifically about the Mar-a-Lago case. The Justice Department formally had recommended Volume 2 be made public. Do you support Volume 2 of the report being made public?
No.
Okay. Do you commit to preserving the evidence in both those investigations?
I commit for sure to following the law and following the rules.
But you won't commit to preserving the evidence. Let's say you have the discretion about destroying the evidence. Do you commit today to preserving the evidence in both those cases?
I commit to following the law.
Okay. And if you can't commit to preserving the evidence in those cases in which you were the defense lawyer, I think, again, that speaks to the conflict of interest that you have as the president's defense lawyer.
I did not commit to it. I said I would follow the law.
No,
I'm not sure what.
Mr. Blanche, I understand everybody's going to say generically they'll follow the law. But I've asked you a simple question about whether you will preserve evidence, and you can't say yes.
No.
You can't say yes.
I hope every single DOJ attorney, political, career, or anybody, would say they would follow the rules as a
And I would hope that any DOJ attorney will say, I will always preserve evidence. There's no circumstance in which I will destroy evidence. That's what I would hope. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you, Senator Schiff. Do you want to say what you were trying to say, or do you want me to move on?
You can move on, Senator. Thank you.
Okay. First of all, I'd like to enter into the record an article by Congressman Jim Jordan, wrote for the Daily Wire yesterday. The article's titled, "Why Todd Blanche is the Right Man for Deputy Attorney General." Then I want to say that for everybody's information, written questions can be submitted for the record until 5 p.m. tomorrow. And so for both of you, it's very important that you get these answered quickly and return them, because until you do, we can't schedule the 5 days ahead of time that we need to consider your nomination. So if you do that, I think that you folks have done a very good job, and I think if you're confirmed, you'll carry out the responsibilities in the non-political way you should. Meeting adjourned.
Thank you.